Rhaegar Targaryen listened to the thunder of war drums echoing across the bank of the ruby-strewn river. They called it the Trident for its forked currents, but to him it was a crossroads of fate, a place where gods and mortals danced to the same wild, bloody tune. The standard of the Targaryen dragon flapped overhead, red on black, snapping in the wind, while the Silver Prince himself, his hair shimmering even in the din of dusk, readied for the final stand that would determine the fate of his house, his father, and his entire realm. Robert Baratheon was out there, somewhere across the muddy waters, among the press of steel-clad men whose loyalties had been forged by the fires of discontent, fear, and the promise of a new order. Word of the rebel lords' victories had spread like a raven's wings through the Seven Kingdoms. They had hammered the royal forces in small engagements, capturing the support of mighty lords and fanning the flames of chaos in King's Landing. Now, in the hour that would matter most, Rhaegar knew if he failed here, it was done. They would lose everything. He sat astride a coal-black warhorse, the beast snorting in the cool air, pawing at the sodden ground. His armor glimmered in the dying light, a plate of enameled black, chased with silver filigree, the three-headed dragon etched proud upon his breast. It was lighter than most suits worn by knights in Westeros, specially forged by the finest smiths of King's Landing, allowing Rhaegar a graceful precision in battle. Clasped in his gauntlet hands was a long spear, a new weapon for him. He usually preferred the sword or the harp, but war demanded new forms of artistry, and he had grown into it. Once they called him the warrior who sang songs about prophecy and longing. They thought him gentle, a dreamer. But war had awakened something else in him, a desire to see the realm set right. A hush fell across the riverbank. The murmur of thousands of men turned expectant as though the entire host held a single breath. Then horn blasts. The rebel banners rippled in the distance, and soon the first wave began to move. The loyalist knights closed in around Rhaegar, forming a wedge. They would strike first, carve a path through the rebels, where Robert Baratheon, massive, unrelenting, rumored to carry a warhammer that no man could rival, would stand and challenge. Rhaegar could already sense him, a towering presence even unseen, like thunderclouds building in the east. When the charge began, it was as if the whole earth shook. Hoofs tore at the riverbank, splashing into shallow waters. Arrows loosed from both sides, slicing overhead in black clouds. Men roared, steel clanged, and the once serene Trident churned red as the first bodies fell. Rhaegar pressed forward, feeling the thrill of it beneath his breastplate, a savage exultation that was part fear, part exultation, part devotion to a cause he believed transcended mortal strife. He heard shouts of "For the king! For Prince Rhaegar!" And from across the battlefield, the deafening cry of "Storm's End!" as Robert's loyal men hollered their war calls. Rhaegar rode down a rebel footman who nearly skewered his horse's flank with a spear. He thrust his own lance with a quick pivot, toppling the man into the blood-flecked water. Rhaegar twisted in the saddle, scanning for a glimpse of Robert's iconic stag helm or that monstrous hammer. More fighting men clashed around him, brandishing swords, axes, maces, war cries echoing in the swirling haze. And then he spotted it. The steel antlers rising above the chaos, the bright fury of that legendary hammer swinging left and right in brutal arcs, clearing a path. A half-dozen loyalist knights converged on Robert to slow him, but the hammer crashed down, splintering shields, knocking men to the ground like broken dolls. The fury of that brute strength was breathtaking even from a distance. Rhaegar grit his teeth. The rebels might be an alliance of men from many houses, but Robert's raw power was the heart of them. Their eyes met across the pandemonium for just an instant, Baratheon's black hair and thick beard matted with sweat and spatter. His eyes locked in a gaze of ferocious challenge. He hefted the hammer once, as if daring Rhaegar to approach. Rhaegar dug his heels into his horse's flanks, urging it forward. He cast aside his lance. Its length made it cumbersome against Robert's quick, brutal swings, and reached instead for his sword. The sword slid from its scabbard, a gleaming thing of Valyrian steel passed down through Targaryen generations. The red rubies that decorated the hilt seemed to glimmer with their own light. When they finally closed, it was like the collision of two storms. Robert swung first, the hammer whistling toward Rhaegar's ribs. Rhaegar managed to parry the blow with a twist of his blade, but the force nearly tore the sword from his hands. The shock reverberated through his arms, and his horse shrieked in alarm. He recovered in time to lash out at Robert's side, but the rebel lord wore plate of black and gold that deflected the strike, leaving only a shallow gouge. Robert roared, stomping forward. The water churned around his boots, tinted pink with blood. They clashed again. The entire world became the clang of steel on steel, the taste of mud and iron in the air, the screaming of horses, the shockwaves of near-fatal blows. Rhaegar's heart hammered, telling him to be calm, to be cunning. He pressed advantage whenever he saw an opening, forcing Robert to yield ground. But each time he tried to finish the fight, Robert was there to meet him, the warhammer swinging in savage arcs. Around them, knights and foot soldiers surged and fought, but none dared to interfere in the duel of two towering champions. Robert feinted to the left, then brought his hammer up in a deadly uppercut. Rhaegar pivoted, letting it pass by inches from his breastplate, then slashed downward with all his might. A shriek of metal told him the blade had found a joint in Robert's armor. Blood spattered the water at their feet, and a gasp went up from the men who watched. The blow forced Robert onto one knee even as he bellowed in pain and rage. Rhaegar's sword was slick with the rebel lord's lifeblood, but before he could finish the strike, Robert launched upward with that unstoppable hammer. Rhaegar threw himself aside, but the hammer's head smashed into his left pauldron, cracking the plate and knocking him off his warhorse. The horse neighed in terror and galloped away, leaving Rhaegar sprawled in the shallows. For an instant, the prince could only cough, struggling to fill his lungs that had been emptied of air. The world spun. He saw Robert's furious eyes approaching, saw the hammer swinging up for a killing blow. Summoning every last reserve of will, Rhaegar kicked out with his steel-toed boot, connecting with Robert's wounded side. Robert groaned, and that half-second of hesitation was enough. Rhaegar raised his sword. When Robert brought the hammer crashing down, Rhaegar rolled. The hammer hit the mud and stone instead, sending up a spray of water and broken shells. Rhaegar slashed Robert's leg from behind, then rose like a coiled viper and drove the blade deep into the rebel lord's chest. For an instant, all sound stilled like the hush before the crashing of a wave. Robert Baratheon staggered. The handle of his warhammer slipped from his fingers, and he stared down at the steel protruding from his ribs. A ragged breath gurgled in his throat. He turned those dark blue eyes on Rhaegar, wide with disbelief and defiance, but no words came. Then he collapsed onto his back in the shallows of the Trident, and the water surged around his body, mingling with the blossoming red of his blood. Silence reigned for a heartbeat, and then the loyalist soldiers roared triumph. Some rebellious knights stood in horror, uncertain of their cause now that their shining champion lay dead, while others redoubled their efforts, fueled by desperate rage. But that ephemeral moment of morale shift was all the Targaryen troops needed. The Crown's army crashed into the rebel lines, unstoppable now. Knights in the dragon's livery pinned the rebels, while Rhaegar's personal guard forced surrenders or exacted bloody retribution, depending on the measure of resistance. On the banks of the Trident, the rebellion that had ravaged the realm for over a year ground to a brutal and decisive end. Rhaegar stood over Robert Baratheon's corpse, feeling a tremor of sorrow, a flicker of regret that it had come to this. But he could not allow Robert to break the realm, to topple House Targaryen. If there was to be a new dawn, it would be under the dragon banner, not the stag. Perhaps, in a different world, they might have been friends. He shut his eyes for a moment, mindful of what had begun this rebellion in the first place. Choices, mistakes, misunderstandings, or perhaps inevitabilities. They had led to death, heartbreak, and thousands of widows. He tore his gaze away and lifted the Targaryen banner in his free hand, raising it high for all to see. His voice, though hoarse, rang out across the field. "Lay down your arms," he called to the remaining rebels, "and you shall have mercy. Continue, and you shall find only death." Some heeded his words, others kept fighting and died swiftly. By nightfall, the rebel forces were scattered or captured, and Robert's broken form had been carried to the loyalist camp in a makeshift litter. A hush descended over the men who camped that night along the banks of the Trident, a hush filled with the ghostly hush of water rolling over stones, the crackle of fires, and the moans of the wounded. Prince Rhaegar tended to his own wounds in a hastily assembled command tent. A maester fussed over him, but Rhaegar waved him off. "Tend to the men who need you more," he commanded, ignoring the throbbing bruise on his shoulder, the cracked plate, the slashes in his mail. The crown prince's duty was to protect and lead, not to preen over trifles while good soldiers bled. When all was done, Rhaegar emerged from the tent. He saw captured lords being brought in. Lord Jon Arryn, face lined with grief, had thrown aside his sword. Lord Hoster Tully was there too, captured earlier, his face sallow with worry. Eddard Stark, however, was not yet found. Word was he had been delayed on the march or possibly was riding with a separate contingent that had not yet arrived. Stannis Baratheon had been pinned at Storm's End by the royal fleet and was far to the south. Now, the rebellion's heart was broken with Robert's death. Rhaegar met the grim gazes of the captive lords. Some spat at the sight of him. Others simply sagged in defeat. In the days that followed, Rhaegar led the loyalist army on a grim march south. No more major battles awaited them. The rebellion was effectively ended, although pockets of resistance might linger. The realm, though battered, was intact. Whispers traveled faster than ravens. The crown prince had slain Robert, the stag had been cut down, and the dragon yet lived. Fear and relief accompanied the rumor. Along the march, Rhaegar took measures to keep the men disciplined, forbidding pillaging or wanton acts of revenge. He extended terms of pardon for rebel soldiers who would lay down arms. Some might see it as weakness, but he intended it as a new beginning. Beneath that magnanimity lay a steely resolve. The realm would be united again, by justice if possible, by fire if necessary. When at last they came within sight of King's Landing, Rhaegar felt conflicting emotions stir within him. The city's high walls and crowded sprawl had once seemed stifling, a place of courtly intrigues he could barely stomach, overshadowed by the madness of his father. But in the turmoil of war, he had longed for the capital's sense of permanence and the weight of history in its labyrinthine streets. The Targaryen banners still flew above the Red Keep's ramparts. Tywin Lannister and his armies had not marched on the city. Indeed, the Lions of the Rock had made no open moves in support of either side, at least not in any decisive way. That was good fortune or cunning planning on Lord Tywin's part, for he would bend whichever way the wind blew hardest. Rhaegar knew the realm needed Lannister gold and neutrality, preferably loyalty, but Tywin's brand of loyalty had never come cheap. Rhaegar's first duty was to his father, though that weighed heavily on him. Aerys II Targaryen had once been a wise king, or so the stories said, but the years had not been kind. Paranoia and cruelty had poisoned him. He had orchestrated the deaths of loyal subjects. He had burned those who displeased him. Even the memory of his father's condemnation of Brandon Stark and Lord Rhaegar with wildfire and gruesome madness filled Rhaegar with a cold rage. The rebellion had not sparked from thin air. Yes, there was his own involvement with Lyanna Stark, but Aerys's rule of terror had galvanized the lords like tinder to a spark. Rhaegar had not condoned it, but neither had he known how to stop it. Now, all of it had led to the ruined fields, the corpses, the shattered families. He remembered the grief in Eddard Stark's eyes when Brandon had been killed. Rhaegar had never met Brandon, nor Ned, beyond brief glimpses at tourneys, but they were tied by fate now. And Lyanna, his heart clenched when he thought of her. She was the reason Robert had wanted him dead and the reason Eddard Stark would never forgive. Lyanna Stark. Rhaegar pressed his lips together. He resolved that if he claimed any future for himself and for the Targaryen line, he would have to deal with the matter of Lyanna openly. For now, though, victory pressed more urgent burdens upon him. When the gates of King's Landing swung wide, the people poured out in raucous greeting, though it was muted by the memory of civil war. Soldiers marched in with battered armor, tattered banners, but also a fierce pride in their prince who had led them to victory. Citizens cheered and threw flowers while others simply looked on, uncertain if this was a time for joy or terror. The long war had brought hunger and fear to the capital, and the name Targaryen did not resonate with the same reverence it once did. Still, Rhaegar saw relief etched on many faces. Perhaps they were simply weary of bloodshed, hoping the realm's rightful heir would restore peace. The Red Keep loomed overhead, its walls stained red as old stone in the sunset. Rhaegar and his guard ascended the winding roads, past the throngs of onlookers, into the grand courtyard where the King's Guard awaited, arrayed in their white cloaks and shining armor. Ser Barristan and Selmy stepped forward, relief and pride mixed on his noble features. He bowed deeply. "Your Grace," he said, though Rhaegar was not yet king, "the king awaits you in the throne room." Rhaegar handed his reins to a groom, nodded to Barristan, and cast a quick glance around. Ser Jaime Lannister was at the back, half in shadow, golden hair gleaming, expression unreadable. The others were there too: Ser Lewin Martell, Ser Jonathan Darry, Ser Oswell Went, all of them battered from the campaigns. Rhaegar straightened his shoulders. He had to see Aerys, but a part of him dreaded what he might find. Inside, the Red Keep was alive with hushed voices. Courtiers in richly dyed fabrics gawked at their prince's battered armor. Rhaegar ignored them and walked with deliberate steps. His footfalls echoed on the marble floors leading toward the great hall. At the far end, the Iron Throne rose up, a twisted mass of swords melted by the fires of dragons past. And upon that seat of ancient authority sat Aerys II Targaryen, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, his silver beard ragged, his eyes lit with the same feverish gleam that had haunted Rhaegar's memory. The king's voice rose. My son returns, he said, arms spread wide in a gesture of triumph. Does all the realm tremble now that the rebellion is crushed? Have you brought me the heads of the traitors, my son? Rhaegar approached the base of the throne, kneeling out of ceremonial habit. The rebels have been defeated at the Trident, he answered quietly. Robert Baratheon is dead. Those who survived have been captured, scattered, or have pledged to surrender. And so their lords will burn, Aerys said, his voice trembling with excitement. They will burn for their treachery, yes? Rhaegar closed his eyes. Father, the realm is weary of blood. We must show mercy or the cycle of war will continue. The rebellion is ended. We should unify the realm now. Aerys' expression twisted. Mercy. He spat the word. You speak of mercy for traitors? They rose against me, they spilled royal blood. You would have us ignore such crimes? The realm needs peace, Rhaegar said. He kept his tone level but firm. The great lords will bend the knee. They have no champion now. We should accept their fealty, not stoke further hatred. For a moment, Aerys did not respond. The tension in the hall grew thick. The courtiers kept their distance, eyes flicking from king to prince. The king's guard stood statue still. Finally, Aerys cackled, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You've grown bold in your absence, my son. Will you also tell me how best to rule, to pronounce judgment? His fingers curled on the throne's armrest, scraping along the jagged edges of molten steel. Still, you are my heir, and a Targaryen does not let lesser men see him divided from his own blood. Very well. Show me these traitors who bend the knee. I shall be the one to decide their fate, not you. His eyes gleamed. But your counsel is heard, my son. Let us see if the rebels truly deserve your gentleness. Rhaegar bowed stiffly. As you say, my king. That night, under the flicker of torchlight, the captives were brought to stand before the king. Lords Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully, and several lesser lords who had joined the rebellion or supported it covertly. They knelt, some stoic, others trembling, before the Iron Throne. Aerys eyed them like a cat about to pounce on wounded birds. Rhaegar stood at his father's side, wearing fresh clothes but still feeling the bruises of war as if they were hammered into his bones. He watched and waited, uncertain if his father would heed the counsel of mercy. Aerys rose. You have conspired against the crown, he said, voice echoing with a brittle fury. You have raised banners, killed loyal knights, threatened the stability of my realm, and spurred the small folk to revolt. Yet my son urges mercy. He gave a thin, mocking smile. Tell me, Lord Arryn, why should I grant you or any of these traitors clemency? Jon Arryn, whose face was lined with age and sorrow, looked up. I followed my wards, Brandon and Eddard Stark, and fostered Robert Baratheon. When your grace killed Brandon Stark without fair trial, we believed the realm was in danger. We rebelled to see justice done. He paused, speaking slowly to keep a measure of respect. But if your grace sees a way to bring peace now, I beg it. Robert is gone. Let us yield. You shall have our fealty. Aerys' expression darkened at the mention of the Starks. Brandon Stark was a fool who threatened my son's life, he hissed, half rising from the throne. Rhaegar quickly raised a hand, stepping forward. Father, he said quietly, we stand on the precipice of restoring unity. Let Lord Arryn live to serve the crown. His lands, his wisdom, they can strengthen the realm. Aerys glowered. Then, slowly, he sank back onto the throne, a pensive look in his eyes. I have grown weary of war, he said, though his tone implied he was more weary of the constraints upon his cruelty. Very well. I shall accept oaths of fealty from these lords for now. His lips twitched into a tight smile, as though the idea of sparing them was a game. But know this, any sign of further treachery, any whisper, and I shall have you all burned in the dragon's fire. The old king let out a raspy laugh. You may kneel. So the captured lords, Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully, and the others, bowed more deeply, promising loyalty. After they were escorted out, the great hall cleared, leaving only Rhaegar and a few attendants. Aerys beckoned him closer. You see, my son, we have not spilled blood this night, though the desire was there. Then his face changed, a manic intensity burning behind his eyes. But I sense that the realm does not love me, he whispered, glancing around as though listening for hidden spies. They love you, Rhaegar. They see in you some rebirth of old Targaryen glory. They forget who truly holds the throne. Rhaegar felt the weight of those words. The realm belongs to House Targaryen, he said carefully. Together we shall restore it. The king gave a dry, mirthless chuckle. Yes, for now, let that be enough. And with that, he dismissed his son into the uncertain corridors of the Red Keep. A fortnight passed. Ravens flew across the 7 kingdoms announcing the death of Robert Baratheon and the defeat of the rebellion. Pockets of resistance were swiftly stamped out or forced to surrender. Lords came to King's Landing to renew vows of fealty, to beg forgiveness, to promise to keep the peace. Even Tywin Lannister marched a well-appointed host to the capital, more a show of strength than anything else, kneeling before the Iron Throne and reaffirming his loyalty. Rhaegar met Tywin's pale green eyes and saw the cold calculation there, the silent promise that the Lannisters would never let themselves be outmaneuvered again. For the moment, at least, Tywin wore the face of a dutiful subject, albeit with the lion's pride emanating from every pore. Yet, amid all these official ceremonies, Rhaegar found himself haunted by matters left unresolved. Chief among them, Lyanna Stark. She was in the Red Keep now, guarded and secreted away from the eyes of the court. Rhaegar had spirited her south months before the height of the rebellion. The rumor in the realm was that he had abducted her for love, or lust, or a mad dream of prophecy. The truth was more complex, and Rhaegar himself struggled to articulate it. She had awakened something in him, an understanding that fate might hinge on the child she carried. Yet war had overshadowed that fragile knowledge, turning love into a justification for vengeance. Robert Baratheon had wanted to kill him for taking Lyanna. Now Robert lay dead, and the woman at the heart of this tragedy was in Targaryen hands. One evening, while the Red Keep slept, Rhaegar slipped down a torchlit hallway toward the tower rooms where Lyanna stayed. Guards at the door saluted and stepped aside. Inside, the chamber was sparse but comfortable, draped in Myrish tapestries. She stood by the narrow window looking down at the black waters of the Blackwater Rush. Her dark hair fell around her shoulders and she wore a plain gown of pale blue. When she turned, her gray eyes met his with a simmering intensity. "You've won," she said, her tone both bitter and wistful. "I hear the city rejoiced that the rebellion is ended. Was it worth it?" Rhaegar closed the door behind him. "Nothing about this war has been worth it," he admitted softly. "But the realm must be at peace. No more innocents slaughtered, no more madness. That was all I ever wanted." She turned back toward the window. "My father is dead, my brother Brandon is dead, Robert is dead. The North is battered. I wonder what peace can be found amid so much grief." He approached, placing a hesitant hand on her arm. She did not pull away. "In time, perhaps, we can mend what has been broken. But it must start with us, our truth." His voice faltered. "I have told you before that I believe we were meant to be together. For reasons beyond ourselves." Lyanna gave a hollow laugh. "You speak of prophecies and the prince that was promised. Once I was flattered or intrigued. Then my brother died in King's Landing, burned on royal orders, and a war was fought to get me back. I wonder if these lofty beliefs are curses rather than blessings." A pang of guilt tore at Rhaegar. "I know I failed to prevent Aerys' madness," he said. "Had I known the king would do such horrors, I would have intervened. But Lyanna," he hesitated, sensing a tumult within her. "What do you want, truly? If you wish to leave, I will not keep you prisoner. If you wish to go to your brother Ned..." She cut him off. "If I go to Ned, what changes? The war is over. Robert is gone. Our families are in ruins. Do I return to a North that hates all Targaryens, carrying a Targaryen's child in my belly?" She laid a hand over the gentle swell of her abdomen, a silent, potent gesture. "I'm not certain what future is best." Rhaegar swallowed. "Then stay here," he said. "You're not a prisoner, but remain. Let me care for you and the child. I will do all in my power to shield you from my father's wrath. And perhaps in time, when I ascend the throne, we can build something better." She glanced at him with a trace of defiance, but also a flicker of the warmth they'd once shared in secret. "And what of your wife, Princess Elia? Of your children with her? Am I to be a second brood mare kept in a gilded cage?" Rhaegar's gaze flickered. The guilt he felt for Princess Elia Martell and his children, Rhaenys and Aegon, still weighed on him. Yet he could not deny the pull that Lyanna had on his heart or the necessity he believed existed in the child she carried. "Elia and I have come to an understanding of sorts," he said carefully, though the truth was more complicated. "We both want what's best for the realm. The question is how the realm will see this arrangement. If I were king, traditions could be rewritten or at least bent. Targaryens of old sometimes took more than one wife. But I don't want to speak of these matters as if you have no voice. I only know I want you safe and that our child should live free from war." Lyanna's shoulders sagged. She was tired, Rhaegar realized. Tired in heart and soul. "We shall see," she murmured. "For now, I'm too weary to decide." Perhaps once the child is born, we will know our course." Rhaegar reached out and gently clasped her hand in his. They stayed like that for a long while, two souls brought together by a prophecy that demanded too much. In the following months, the realm settled into an uneasy peace. The rebel lords returned to their domains, sullenly swearing loyalty. Eddard Stark, rumored to be riding south, finally arrived in King's Landing. His entrance was not triumphant. He came with a small retinue, half expecting to be taken prisoner at once. Yet Rhaegar, in an act of conciliation, received him with courtesy. Ned Stark, haunted by the deaths of his father, brother, and friend, tried to remain icily polite. But Rhaegar could see the anger simmering beneath. Ned demanded to see his sister to confirm she was well. Rhaegar, with reluctance, arranged a meeting. That encounter in Lyanna's chambers was a quiet storm. Ned embraced his sister, relief and fury warring in his features. "Are you well?" he asked, searching her face. She nodded, tears gathering. "I am with child," she admitted, though Ned likely suspected. "Rhaegar says I may leave if I wish, but I have not decided." Ned looked as though he might break something in that moment. His knuckles whitened. "Lyanna, you know what Robert meant to you. Did you care for him at all?" She let out a shaky breath. "I cared for him as a friend once, but I never wanted the shape of life he had in mind. He was Robert, unstoppable, full of a warrior spirit. But it was not my spirit. I chose my path, though I did not understand the war it would bring." Ned clenched his jaw. "Then I cannot blame you for a war started by a mad king's cruelty. But the North will never accept this. You must come home. I'll keep you safe. My people will not harm you." Lyanna closed her eyes. "Home," she murmured. "Yes, I miss it. But I fear for the child. I don't trust King Aerys not to send killers to the north just to pluck my baby from the cradle or punish me. At least here, with Rhaegar, I have some protection." Her gaze shifted to the window far away. "I don't know, Ned. Perhaps I will come north in time. Let me gather my strength." Ned remained stiff, trying to keep his voice steady. "You have my love always, sister. I will never forgive them for the wrongs done to our family, but I will respect your choice." His eyes flicked toward the door where two guards stood. "But do not expect me to kneel to a Targaryen with joy in my heart." Word of Ned's presence in the city reached King Aerys. The king demanded an audience, and Rhaegar was forced to orchestrate it. The tension in the throne room was thick enough to taste, heavy with old grievances and fresh hatred. Ned Stark knelt, albeit stiffly, before the Iron Throne, pledged his loyalty in a flat voice, and rose again. Aerys sneered, but for once, did not order any burnings. Perhaps it was Rhaegar's presence at his side, or the fear that the realm would break again if he provoked the North. For whatever reason, Ned was allowed to leave unharmed, though the king's glare followed him out like a curse. As winter's chill approached, a new question seized the court, the matter of the succession. Aerys seemed to grow more paranoid by the day. He ranted that traitors still lurked everywhere, including perhaps the Martells, or even among the small folk. Rhaegar, meanwhile, carried himself with regal poise, receiving lords, hearing petitions, and quietly rebuilding the crown's alliances. He saw to it that the small folk were fed, that roads were repaired. He even ordered relief to areas ravaged by the war, paying for seeds to replant burnt fields. Slowly, the name Rhaegar Targaryen began to stir new hope among the realm's people. But the king's mistrust of his heir was palpable. At one council session, Aerys abruptly demanded that the Kingsguard remain by his side at all times, rotating shifts around his chambers night and day. Rhaegar recognized that the king felt vulnerable, but he did not anticipate the next move. One day, the gold cloaks of the city watch burst into a secret meeting of certain lords, arresting them for treasonous plotting. The lords insisted it was only a discussion about trade routes, but Aerys declared them guilty. He wanted them burned. Rhaegar intervened, rallying other lords to protest. In the end, they were imprisoned but not executed. That was a small victory, but it reflected the precarious balance. Rhaegar's growing influence against Aerys' madness. Then came the child. Lyanna's labor pains struck late one night, and Rhaegar was roused from his bedchamber by a frantic servant. He hurried to her rooms, finding midwives already attending. Lyanna was drenched in sweat, hair plastered to her forehead, breathing in sharp, panicked gasps. Rhaegar knelt beside her, holding her hand. She squeezed with surprising strength as another contraction tore through her body. At that moment, he felt a terror far greater than any battlefield. Here was the mother of a child he believed might be the pivot of prophecy, the child he had dreamed about in the crypts, the child whose existence might herald the dawn of a new age. Hours dragged on, each contraction bringing fresh cries from Lyanna. The midwives exchanged worried glances as the labor grew long. Rhaegar brushed Lyanna's hair back, whispering reassurances. She glared at him once, breathing raggedly, tears in her eyes. "All this prophecy," she gasped, "and it doesn't make the pain any easier." But she clung to his hand through every wave of agony. Dawn was casting pale light through the shuttered windows when finally, with one last piercing scream, Lyanna delivered a son. The midwives quickly took the newborn, rubbing him down, freeing his airways. He let out a fragile wail, a plaintive cry that echoed in the hush. Lyanna sank back into the pillows, exhausted. Rhaegar turned to the child, hardly daring to breathe. He was a small thing, face wrinkled and slick with birth. Already he had a fuzz of dark hair upon his head. When they placed him in Lyanna's arms, she gazed at him with such a mixture of wonder and heartbreak that Rhaegar felt a knot in his throat. He knelt by her side, placing a trembling hand on the child's tiny head. The baby quieted at his touch, blinking new eyes. "It's a boy," Lyanna whispered. "He looks like me, though perhaps he has your eyes." Then her gaze flicked to Rhaegar. "What name will he bear?" Rhaegar swallowed. "He will be a Targaryen," he said. "But if you wish to honor your family in some way," he thought of the Stark line, the tragedies. "We could name him Jaehaerys after wise kings of old, or—" "Jon," Lyanna said softly. "Let him be called Jon, so he might belong to both sides. My father was Rhaegar, my brother was Brandon, but my other brother was Benjen. We have no Jons in our line. Let him have a new name. A clean slate." She looked up, teary-eyed. "But you said Targaryen. Will you call him Jon Targaryen?" Rhaegar nodded, though part of him wanted a more traditional Targaryen name. Yet he found her logic compelling. This child would be different, bridging north and south, forging unity. "Jon Targaryen," he murmured, stroking the baby's hair. "Yes, that will do." Just then, the door burst open. Aerys Targaryen stormed in, flanked by guards and 2 members of the King Guard. His mad eyes took in the scene, Lyanna in bed, the newborn in her arms, Rhaegar kneeling at her side. The tension in the room was palpable. "So it's true," Aerys hissed. "You have sired a bastard on the daughter of our enemies. Did you think to hide him from me?" His voice trembled with a dangerous edge. Rhaegar rose, keeping his tone calm. "This child is of Targaryen blood, father. I have claimed him. He is not a bastard. Lyanna Stark is mine by right." Aerys let out a laugh that sent shivers down the midwives' spines. "Yours by right," he echoed. "You have a wife, my son. What nonsense is this? The realm laughs at our house's disgrace. How dare you, how dare she?" He pointed a trembling finger at Lyanna. "She's the sister of traitors, and you have brought her here to breed." Rhaegar felt anger coil in his chest. He stepped closer. "Watch your words," he said, voice low. "This woman is under my protection. She carries the future of our house as well." Aerys' eyes widened, full of fury, but also a glint of caution. "What madness is in your head, Rhaegar? Do you fancy yourself a second Rhaegar, taking multiple wives? Is that the shape of your ambition?" He glanced at the guards. "I could have her taken. I could have the child." "Stop," Rhaegar interrupted, voice firm, cutting through the tension like a drawn blade. The King's Guard in the room shifted uneasily, uncertain between king and prince. But Ser Barristan Selmy had lingered in the corridor. Now he stepped inside, making his presence clear. "This child is a Targaryen prince. Father," Rhaegar pressed on, a warning in his tone. "Should any harm come to him or Lyanna, it would be an unspeakable crime." He drew himself up. "You have your heir in me, but the realm will need more, and it will accept him." Aerys' nostrils flared. He shot a murderous glare at Lyanna, then at Rhaegar. A trembling hush fell upon the room. Then, Aerys exhaled, forcing a grin that revealed his teeth. "Very well," he said, voice dripping contempt. "Let the realm see that my house is too strong to be undone by petty treasons. The child may live, for now." His eyes found Lyanna. "But I shall have my watchers posted. Any hint of treachery, and you both burn." With that, the king turned on his heel and swept out, the door banging shut behind him. Lyanna let out a ragged breath. Rhaegar stood there, heart thundering. The midwives hurried out, leaving them in tense quiet. Lyanna clutched the baby close, eyes wide with fear. "What have you done?" she whispered. "He will kill us both." Rhaegar sat gently on the edge of the bed, placing a hand over hers. "He will not dare," he said, though his voice shook. "The realm is already precarious. If he murdered you, the North would rise again. And if he murdered me, Prince Aegon, Rhaenys, and Jon, House Targaryen would tear itself apart. He knows this." He tried to sound sure, but dread coiled around his heart. He stroked the baby's cheek. "We must be careful, though. Promise me you will remain here, in the Red Keep, until I can secure your safety." She closed her eyes and nodded, tears slipping free. "As if I have a choice." The days that followed were fraught. Whispers traveled through the halls. Prince Rhaegar had fathered another child, this time on Lyanna Stark, the woman whose abduction had sparked a civil war. Yet many in the city were pragmatic. The war was over, and perhaps a link between North and South could bring stability. In Dorne, Princess Elia Martell received the news of the child's birth with a poised sadness. She had heard from Rhaegar's own lips that he believed in some grand prophecy. So, to her credit, she penned a measured letter expressing guarded acceptance and reaffirming her loyalty to him as her husband and future king. Though heartbreak surely weighed heavy on her mind, she considered her children's place in the line of succession and concluded that civil strife within House Targaryen would be the worst fate of all. Rhaegar devoted himself to protecting Lyanna and baby Jon. He insisted on placing Kingsguard at her door, men he trusted. King Aerys countered by adding his own guards loyal to him. The tower chambers became a swirl of watchful eyes day and night like a fortress within the Red Keep. Yet, ironically, the king seldom ventured near. He seemed content to brood on his throne or roam his private chambers plagued by nightmares of betrayal. Rumors said he was already making plans to discover caches of wildfire in the city in case the realm needed a demonstration of power. Rhaegar, alarmed, tried to investigate. But the pyromancers were loyal to the king alone, and they would not speak of such matters to the prince. Tensions rose. All the while, Rhaegar kept up the show of normal governance, meeting with the small council, smoothing relations with the great houses. The Tullys had returned to Riverrun, the Arryns to the Eyrie, the Tyrells remained in Highgarden, and the Lannisters lingered in the capital, watchful. Eddard Stark quietly took his sister's counsel, choosing to remain in King's Landing for a time, determined to be near Lyanna and see for himself that she was safe, though he disliked every moment spent in this viper's nest. He rarely spoke to Rhaegar, but when they crossed paths, they exchanged curt acknowledgments, both aware that the child's future hung in the balance. It was after one such council meeting that Rhaegar found Ser Barristan and Selmy waiting in the corridor. The older knight wore a solemn expression. "Prince Rhaegar," he said quietly, "I have heard rumors that the king is considering a purge of those who once fought against him to secure the realm's loyalty through fear. He might try to arrest Lord Stark again. He might burn others to send a message." Rhaegar's jaw tightened. "I feared as much," he said. "His madness grows. But I must be cautious. If I move openly against my father, it will split the realm anew." Ser Barristan inclined his head. "Then perhaps you must take the throne. In the old Targaryen histories, it is said that if a king is unfit, the heir has a duty to protect the realm." His voice was soft, but resolute. "I have served your father many years. Yet I believe the realm is best served by you." Rhaegar stared at the White Knight, scanning his noble face for any sign of deception. He found none. "Treason," he murmured, though he did not sound outraged, just resigned. "To depose a sitting king, my own father, would be an act of high treason." "If the king is truly mad," Barristan said, "the realm will suffer more if we do not act. The King's Guard, I believe, would stand with you so long as we do not stoop to the brutality that has stained the throne. Some of us have grown troubled by his commands these past years." Rhaegar pressed his lips together. The notion was not new to him, it had simmered in his thoughts for months, perhaps years. Could he save the realm by removing his father, forcing him to abdicate? Or would that unleash a new wave of violence and condemnation? "I will consider it," Rhaegar said quietly. "But we must not be rash." Yet that fateful course seemed more likely with each passing day. Aerys' paranoia reached new heights. He ranted about hidden traitors, demanded the city gates be locked each night, increased taxes to fund a grand project that no one fully understood, and had ravens sent to the lords of Westeros with cryptic warnings. Even the small council was unsettled. Tywin Lannister observed with cold assessment, offering no overt condemnation of the king but also no solutions. Varys, the spy master, scuttled about, dropping hints that the king's behavior was stirring new unrest among the people. Tensions snapped on a cold, blustery morning when Aerys announced that Eddard Stark was to be arrested for the crime of treasonous thoughts. Aerys declared he had heard rumors that Ned meant to steal Lyanna away in the night to raise the North again. Stark's denials fell on deaf ears. The king demanded Ned be dragged to the throne room in chains to face summary judgment. Rhaegar arrived in time to see Gold Cloaks manhandling Ned, who refused to yield quietly but was outnumbered. Aerys sat on the Iron Throne, eyes blazing. Rhaegar strode forward, cloak swirling around him, voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. "This is madness, father. Release Lord Stark. There is no evidence of treason. He came here under your peace." Aerys sneered, pointing a long finger. "You dare question me in my own hall? This whelp would steal your mistress from under our nose. You would let him do it too if it meant preserving your illusions of mercy." Ned Stark spat blood from a split lip. "I asked my sister if she wished to return home, nothing more. I have not raised a single banner against you." He glared at the king but said no more. Aerys stood, his cloak falling behind him. A traitor's words. "Guards, take him to the dungeons. We shall see how quickly treason is confessed under a little persuasion." That was the moment Rhaegar realized there was no more room for compromise. He nodded once to Ser Barristan, who signaled the king's guard. In an instant, the white-cloaked knights fanned out, placing themselves between the gold cloaks and Eddard Stark. The court gasped. Aerys' face contorted with disbelief. "What is this?" he screamed. "Treason from my own guards?" Rhaegar drew his sword in a smooth, decisive motion. The rasp of steel rang loud in the hush. "Father," he said, voice trembling with heartbreak but unwavering with resolve, "I can no longer allow you to harm the realm. By all the laws of gods and men, I am your heir and you are unfit to rule. Step down." Aerys looked for an instant like a cornered animal, half mad with fear and rage. "You cannot command me to step down." His bony hand twitched for the dagger at his waist. "I am the king. I am Aerys Targaryen, the dragon." Rhaegar's sword came up, pointed directly at the dais. "In the name of the seven," he said, "I, Rhaegar of House Targaryen, rightful prince of the seven kingdoms, do hereby lay claim to the Iron Throne. Father, yield, and you shall live out your days in guarded comfort or in the faith's custody, if you prefer." Aerys shrieked. He lunged forward as if to throw himself upon Rhaegar's blade or to seize a weapon from the throne's jagged edges. In that moment, chaos erupted. The gold cloaks roared, uncertain whom to obey. Some turned on the king's guard, others hesitated. Tywin Lannister, standing to one side, watched with eyes like flint. Varys clutched his hands in horror as though not fully surprised but dreading the carnage. Ned Stark, half collapsed, was shielded by two Kingsguard knights. Then Aerys' foot slipped on a step. He lost his balance, and as he flailed, one of the Iron Throne's sword edges scored a deep gash across his palm. He howled, eyes bulging, blood streaming. "Traitors!" he shrieked again, voice echoing. "Burn them all." Then his hand found a rung of twisted metal. He jerked, as if to pull a blade free, and Ser Jaime Lannister, in a panicked flash of movement, lunged up the dais behind him. "Your Grace," Jaime began, but Aerys whirled, brandishing the improvised blade. Jaime ducked, reflex quick as a serpent, and his own sword came up. The point of Jaime's sword slid between two plates of the king's armor and into Aerys' side. A moment of shock froze the hall. Aerys blinked, blood coloring his mouth. He opened his mouth to scream again, but only a wet cough emerged. Then he collapsed onto the stone steps, the makeshift blade tumbling from his limp fingers. A hush fell, so profound that Rhaegar could hear the crackling torches in the sconces. After a heartbeat of stunned silence, Rhaegar rushed to his father's side, ignoring the danger of the throne's edges. Aerys' eyes were wide, milky with terror and confusion. Rhaegar knelt, cradling the old king's head. Blood stained the stone steps. "Father," Rhaegar whispered, stricken, tears threatening. But Aerys did not speak again. Within moments, the Mad King drew a final, ragged breath and went still. The Red Keep's great hall seemed to resonate with that final emptiness. Ser Jaime knelt there, golden hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide with shock at what he had done. No one else dared move or speak. At last, Rhaegar laid his father's head gently down, stood, and turned to face the silent court. Blood slicked his hand. "I claim the Iron Throne," he said softly, though his voice carried. "I do so not with joy, but with necessity. The reign of Aerys Targaryen is ended." He swallowed hard, looking across the men and women gathered. "I shall be a just king." The hush broke. Some lords dropped to one knee. Others simply stared, hearts pounding, as they realized they had witnessed a second regicide in the same decade, but this time from within House Targaryen itself. Tywin Lannister stepped forward with measured grace, kneeling, addressing Rhaegar as Your Grace. That was the sign. The rest of the court followed suit, and the hush of shock gave way to a swell of voices proclaiming fealty. The gold cloaks, uncertain moments before, bowed as well. Eddard Stark, bruised and battered, was gently freed from his chains by a Kingsguard knight. He stared at Rhaegar with an unreadable expression, then slowly inclined his head. Thus did Rhaegar Targaryen ascend to the throne of the Seven Kingdoms, baptized in the blood of his father. The new king's first decree was to ensure no further bloodshed in the throne room. He ordered the gold cloaks to stand down, commanded the release of any prisoners wrongly held for treason, and insisted that Ned Stark be tended by the maesters. He then dismissed the court, saying he wished to keep vigil over his father's body in Targaryen tradition. Through that long night, Rhaegar sat alone by the corpse of Aerys, a swirl of conflicting emotions in his heart: grief, relief, guilt, and a grim sense of destiny. He offered final prayers for the man who had once been his father, once a king with promise, undone by madness and fear. In the morning, he rose, donned a simple black cloak, and summoned the small council to plan his coronation. The realm, reeling from the abrupt change, was taken by a mixture of trepidation and hope. Some whispered of Rhaegar's rumored fascination with prophecy, but many believed him a fair-minded man who had shown mercy when Aerys would have chosen cruelty. If he could unite north, south, east, and west, perhaps the scars of the rebellion could heal. His first acts strengthened that impression. He pardoned many who had sided with Robert, withheld vengeance, and instead sought to restore normalcy. He announced a grand funeral for King Aerys, an event meant to display Targaryen power but also to mark the start of a new reign. The funeral pyre was built on the plains outside King's Landing, where thousands gathered. When the king's body was consumed by flame, Rhaegar stood by, face solemn, the new crown of black iron and rubies resting upon his silver hair. Soon after, the coronation was held in the Great September of Baelor. The High Septon anointed Rhaegar with the 7 oils, proclaiming him King Rhaegar of the 7 Kingdoms, protector of the realm. The dragon banner was raised high. The lords and ladies in attendance knelt, and the bells of King's Landing tolled with a sonorous clang that reverberated along the streets. Rhaegar emerged from the September crowned, flanked by his queen's guard. A roar rose from the gathered crowds, some hopeful, some uncertain, but all intrigued by the man who had ended a war and replaced a tyrant. In the aftermath, Rhaegar faced the delicate matter of his family. He confirmed Elia Martell as his rightful queen, mother of Aegon and Rhaenys, retaining her place of honor. Yet he acknowledged Lyanna Stark as his paramour and consort, a bold, controversial move. He insisted she was not a mere mistress but someone whom the new king held in high regard. The shock rippled through the nobility. Some whispered that it was reminiscent of Targaryen custom from centuries past, but many found it scandalous. Still, with the memory of war fresh, few dared openly protest. Lyanna herself bore it with stoic resignation for the sake of her child. Her brother Ned prepared to return north, but only after extracting Rhaegar's promise that Lyanna could go freely if she ever wished. Rhaegar agreed, though he suspected Lyanna might choose to remain near baby Jon. Ned departed, his relationships with the new king far from warm, but no longer at the point of open hostility. King Rhaegar's rule soon took shape. He gathered wise counselors, including Jon Connington, his old friend and now Hand of the King. Tywin Lannister withdrew to Casterly Rock, perhaps uneasy with the changed order but outwardly loyal. The Martells found their prestige renewed through Queen Elia, though the matter of a second consort caused tension. The realm's finances required urgent attention as war had depleted the treasury. Rhaegar introduced new measures to encourage trade, lower certain taxes on small folk, and reward loyalty with a lighter hand than his father's. Over time, the kingdom breathed easier. Roads became safer, banditry decreased, trade flourished once more. Yet beyond the horizon lay threats invisible to most. In the free cities, rumors abounded of pirates, slavers, and the ever-shifting alliances that might someday imperil Westeros. Far in the east, whispers of dragons stirring in shadowy lands. And in the north, beyond the wall, there were quiet warnings from the Night's Watch about strange sightings in the deep snows. Rhaegar did not ignore such portents. Occasionally, he would confide in Ser Barristan or in Lyanna, speaking of old prophecies about the return of darkness, the long night, and the need for a prince who was promised. Some nights, he would pace the Red Keep's highest tower, looking toward the distant stars, pondering the meaning of ancient texts. He placed high value on forging unity among the great houses, believing that a united Westeros would stand stronger against any eventual calamity. As the years passed, King Rhaegar proved a capable ruler. The realm stabilized under his reforms. Festivals and tourneys were held once again, the small folk allowed moments of joy. The memory of Robert's rebellion receded into the realm's collective past, overshadowed by the majesty of a Targaryen king who walked among his people with courtesy and empathy. Some older lords grumbled about the presence of two women linked to the king, but that controversy never sparked open revolt. Rhaegar's skillful balancing of alliances, along with his unstoppable aura of destiny, quieted the discontent. Children grew up hearing about the Prince of Dragonstone who defeated the rebel Robert Baratheon, ascended to the throne after a tragic confrontation with his mad father, and ushered in a new era. Lyanna's son, Jon, was raised alongside Aegon and Rhaenys, though many in the court remained uncertain how to regard him. Officially, Rhaegar recognized him as a Targaryen prince. Unofficially, some lords whispered that he was an insult to Elia Martell or that he might someday challenge Aegon's inheritance. Yet King Rhaegar discouraged such talk, insisting all three children were his beloved heirs and that unity of House Targaryen was paramount. Jon grew up a quiet boy, watchful and serious. From his mother, he learned of the North, the honor of the Starks, the howling of wolves in winter. From his father, he inherited a sense of duty and the weight of prophecy, though it would be years before he understood the significance. When Jon was old enough to walk the Red Keep's corridors, old enough to ask questions in a sweet, curious voice, Rhaegar would often kneel beside him, show him the rubies on his sword's pommel, and speak softly of the day when you and your brother shall stand side by side, protecting this kingdom. Lyanna, quietly observing, found her heart torn between sorrow for the North she missed and a fragile hope that perhaps her son could inherit a better future. Occasionally, she would visit Winterfell, especially after her mother and younger brother Benjen wrote to her. But she always returned to the Red Keep. In time, Ned Stark resigned himself to the arrangement, content that Lyanna seemed well, that her child thrived, and that the new king was not his father. It was an uneasy peace, but a peace nonetheless. Life in the Seven Kingdoms became a tapestry of justs, alliances, marriages, and the mundane business of governance. King Rhaegar presided over it with a measured hand, aided by trusted counselors. He sought to rebuild the faith of the people in the crown. In the third year of his reign, he abolished some of the crueler laws Aerys had instituted, replaced harsh punishments with more balanced justice, and funded the reconstruction of towns ruined during the war. Commoners began to speak kindly of him, calling him the Dragon King who loved his harp as much as his sword. That winter was milder than expected, and some whispered that the gods blessed the land again. Yet Rhaegar never forgot the danger of complacency. He kept the realm's armies well-drilled, ensuring that if ever a threat emerged, whether from within or without, Westeros would be ready. He also maintained vigilance toward the Iron Islands, aware that the Greyjoys might seek to test the new king. But when Lord Balon Greyjoy made overtures of rebellion, Rhaegar swiftly sent ships to fortify key positions and made clear that any rebellion would be crushed. Balon bent the knee anew. Sometimes, late at night, the memory of Robert Baratheon intruded on Rhaegar's dreams. The image of that broad-shouldered warrior with the antlered helm, roaring defiance at the Trident, refusing to fall until the final blow. Rhaegar would wake, remembering the look in Robert's eyes at the end, sorrow and hatred mingled. And always, Rhaegar would think, could there have been another path? If the realm had not descended into madness, if father had not butchered Brandon Stark, if. The specters of that war lingered, a reminder of the fragile line between order and chaos. But time flowed forward, carrying them all with it. A new generation was growing, a children of Targaryen, Martell, and Stark blood, who ran through the Red Keep's hallways and read stories of the White Walkers and the Targaryen conquest. Queen Elia's health recovered after the trials of war. She doted on her children, teaching them the ways of courtly grace. Lyanna, more willful, encouraged Jon to explore the practice yard to learn about the North. The two women were never close, but for the sake of their children, they maintained a polite understanding. Rhaegar, for his part, spent time with both of them, though the demands of kingship were ceaseless. Tensions still flared now and again. Lords Tyrell or Lannister sometimes quarreled with Dorne or the Stormlands, but a firm hand and careful negotiation prevented these sparks from becoming flames. On the 5th anniversary of Robert's defeat, King Rhaegar held a great tournament at Harrenhal, a place famous for shadows and curses, but also for legendary gatherings. He declared it a celebration of unity across the realm, an invitation for knights and lords to come test their skill and reaffirm their bonds. The monstrous towers of Harrenhal loomed against the sky, a testament to ambition undone by dragonfire centuries past. Now, under Rhaegar's watch, it was a place for festivities, though ghosts were rumored to wander its corridors at night. Lords arrived in droves: Starks, Tullis, Arryns, Tyrells, Lannisters, Martells, Baratheons, and more. Pavilions sprang up around the castle grounds, colorful banners snapping in the wind. The lists were prepared. Nobles mingled at lavish feasts, toasting to King Rhaegar and the restored peace. Some whispered gossip about the two women in the king's life. Others speculated about the children's futures. But overall, an air of optimism prevailed. The first day of jousting was spectacular, with Ser Jaime Lannister unhorsing several formidable opponents, Ser Barristan and Selmy fighting in the melee as gracefully as ever, and Prince Aegon Targaryen making a good showing in the archery contest, though he was still quite young. In the grandstands, King Rhaegar sat, flanked by Queen Elia on one side and Lyanna on the other, a symbolic statement that might have caused outrage years before. Now it was accepted if somewhat awkward. Little Jon Targaryen, dark-haired and curious, sat on Lyanna's lap, eyes wide at the spectacle of shining knights. Rhaenys and Aegon sat with their mother, cheering as the warriors thundered past with lowered lances. When the final tilt of the day concluded, the crowd roared in admiration. The victor, a Dornish knight, rode up to the royal box and declared he dedicated his triumph to the wisdom of our king and the grace of his queen. Rhaegar inclined his head with a measured smile, though he cast a small glance at Lyanna as if to say, "You see, we are finding our way." She caught the glance and gave a faint, complicated smile in return. Night fell, and torches turned the castle courtyard into a swirl of music and dancing. Lords and ladies laughed, sampling arbor wine and Braavosi delicacies. Jugglers and fire-eaters entertained the crowds, overshadowing the gloom that once clung to Harrenhal's blackened walls. In a quiet corner, Rhaegar found himself stepping away from the throng, out toward a balcony overlooking the lake. The moon was high, silvered reflection dancing on the water's surface. He sensed movement behind him and turned to see Eddard Stark standing there, face half in shadow. "My Lord Stark," Rhaegar said, inclining his head. "I did not know you remained for the feast." Ned gave a taut smile. "I came to ensure my men were accounted for, and to watch over my sister in case she needed me." He paused, though it seems she has found her own place here. Rhaegar gazed at the reflection of the moon. "I know this remains difficult for you. It may always be so. But I promise you, Lyanna is free to come or go. She stays because she wishes to." He looked Ned in the eye. "I will protect her. I will protect your nephew too." Ned's voice was gruff. I see that you mean to keep your word. And the realm thrives more under you than ever it did under your father." He exhaled. "I am not blind to the improvements. Winterfell is at peace and the north recovers. But there is still bitterness. My people remember the burned remains of my kin. Forgiveness is not a thing easily won." "I would not ask you to forget," Rhaegar said quietly. "But perhaps with time we can build a realm where such horrors never happen again. Your loyalty, your help, could prevent another madness on the throne." They stood in silence, listening to the distant music. At last, Ned nodded. "For the sake of our families," he said, "for the memory of those we lost, we must try. My father always told me the North's duty is to endure, to guard the realm. So let us guard it together." Rhaegar inclined his head. "Together, then?" With that unspoken accord, they parted. It was not quite friendship, but it was acceptance, the seeds of respect. The realm would need such alliances, Rhaegar knew. For shadows still lurked in the corners of the world. Old powers stirred, new threats might arise. Yet in that moment, in the moonlit courtyard of Harrenhal, King Rhaegar Targaryen allowed himself a measure of hope. His house was preserved. The rebellion that once threatened to tear the realm apart was ended, and the crowned dragon soared above Westeros once again. Whatever the future held, ice, fire, or something in between, he believed they stood a better chance united under the banner of peace he had forged at the Trident. And if prophecy was to be fulfilled, he would face it head-on, with Lyanna, Elia, and his children by his side, forging a new chapter in the annals of the Seven Kingdoms, one that might, just might, save them all. The moon was full in the sky, high above the tall black towers of Harrenhal, and the revelry of the evening's celebrations still drifted through the courtyards and halls. Distant strains of pipes and drums echoed across the lake, and the shifting silhouettes of lanterns moved along the walls. King Rhaegar Targaryen lingered near the half-crumbled ramparts, gazing down at the reflection of the moon on the dark water, remembering a swirl of images that felt caught between dream and memory. He had spoken with Eddard Stark not long ago, had felt the man's begrudging acceptance and calm admonitions in equal measure, and now a deeper hush settled over Rhaegar's heart. So many fragile alliances had been formed since his coronation, so many grievances not yet healed. For the moment, at least, the realm stood at peace. He closed his eyes and inhaled the damp, cool air of the night. Through the open door behind him, laughter rose from the great feast in the Hall of 100 Hearths. Knights and ladies, lordlings and merchants all found themselves celebrating a victory more precious than any individual tilt or melee that the realm had managed 5 years of relative stability under a new Targaryen king. Rhaegar told himself it was enough for now. He opened his eyes, set his jaw, and turned to rejoin the festivities. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after he would journey back to King's Landing. For tonight, he would be the king these lords and ladies needed to see, a figure of unity and promise, standing amid the monstrous silhouette of Harrenhal's melted towers as proof that no curse was too great to overcome. Within the main hall, the firelight gleamed on 100 polished suits of armor and the embroidered finery of lords from every corner of the realm. Queen Elia Martell sat at a table of honor, laughing softly at something Oberyn Martell had said. She looked elegant yet resolute, the deep gold of her gown complementing her dusk-colored hair, and though her health had once been frail, there was a renewed fire in her that spoke of quiet pride. Rhaegar's 2 older children, Rhaenys and Aegon, sat with their Dornish cousins under Elia's watchful eye. Nearby, Lyanna Stark reclined at another table, cradling little Jon on her lap, though he had begun to wriggle with youthful impatience. The feasting had gone on for hours, the child wanted to roam. Rhaegar made a point of greeting many lords in turn. Lord Hoster Tully, his face still stamped by the memory of the rebellion, forced a courteous smile. Lord Jon Arryn stood stoic, exchanging measured words about how the Vale had fared well in the renewed trade routes. Even Lord Mace Tyrell, nearly as large as a small bull, boomed about new harvests in the Reach and bowed graciously. Rhaegar thanked them all, listened politely to their concerns, and did his best to portray the image of the stable, confident king. And across the hall he saw Tywin Lannister. The former Hand of the King, once to Aerys, briefly parted from that station, now reinstalled on the small council in a less direct capacity, remained an imposing figure with his sharp green eyes and receding golden hair. Tywin's face was unreadable except for the faint tightening at the corners of his lips. He caught Rhaegar's gaze and dipped his head in a curt acknowledgement. It was enough for now, though Rhaegar could not ignore how Tywin's presence still felt like a lion watching from the shadows. He had not pressed his advantage in the wake of Aerys' death. Instead, he seemed content to let Rhaegar rule uncontested while House Lannister reaped the benefits of a stable crown. Yet a lion's claws were never far beneath that gilded surface. After polite exchanges and small courtesies, the king returned to the dais where his family and close companions sat. Jon Connington, Rhaegar's old friend and newly appointed Hand of the King, beckoned him closer and murmured, "We have heard from the Iron Islands. No hostilities for now. Lord Greyjoy is quiet, perhaps too quiet, but the moment we see any sign of a fleet taking to sea in force, we can move our galleys. We'll keep watch." "Good," Rhaegar said, placing a hand on Connington's shoulder. "I want no more rebellions brewing in dark corners. Let's not let Balon Greyjoy catch us unprepared." Connington nodded firmly and Rhaegar took his seat at the high table. Across from him, Lyanna gazed up, softly rocking Jon, who was nearly asleep despite the din of music around them. "He's had enough of lutes and fiddles," she said with a wry smile. "He'll be crawling under tables next if I let him." Rhaegar's own heart softened at the sight of the boy, dark hair curling at the nape of his neck, eyes fluttering as drowsiness claimed him. "He'll grow up with music and feasts," Rhaegar said, letting a small note of regret creep into his voice. "I only hope he never faces the kind of war we did." He glanced aside at Aegon and Rhaenys, who were laughing with Elia's kin. They were just children, all of them oblivious for the moment to the burdens that came with power. He remembered how, in his youth, he had been drawn to songs and poetry, not fully comprehending the responsibilities that would one day be forced upon him. Lyanna's voice, quiet yet resolute, interrupted his thoughts. "I will do all I can to see that Jon grows up safe and free from your father's legacy," she said. "He may be a prince of Targaryen blood, but I'm a Stark. We keep our children close. We protect them." Her gray eyes flicked around the hall. "This place feels more peaceful than King's Landing. A ruin, yes, but wide open. At least here the children can run without constant watchers." She had come a long way from the anxious, mistrustful woman who'd first borne Rhaegar's child in the Red Keep. Though caution still lingered in every glance, she no longer looked at him as an enemy or a captor. There was fondness in her eyes too, tempered by the memory of the horrors that had driven the realm to war. Rhaegar inclined his head. One day, Harrenhal could be restored to something more than a ruin. Perhaps we'll see that day together. Nearby, Queen Elia rose gracefully from her seat and signaled the minstrels to pause. The hall quieted. Her voice, a soft contralto, carried with ease, "Good lords and ladies, we have feasted, we have toasted victories, and now I ask each of you to remember why we gather, for unity." Let us toast our king, who has shepherded these peaceful years, and let us pray the gods grant many more." At once, a roar of approval washed through the hall. Rhaegar stood, and as the crowd quieted, he raised his goblet. "My friends, let us all pray the same. The realm is like a tapestry woven of many threads, stronger together than apart. I will do my utmost to keep it intact and vibrant." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembly. "In memory of those who died in the wars, we do not raise our cups in triumph alone. We raise them for peace." At that, another cheer erupted, mingled with the faint clink of goblets. Music began again, and talk turned to lighter matters. Rhaegar took the chance to slip away after pressing a gentle kiss atop Jon's curly hair. Lyanna smiled, gently rising to take the boy to the room they'd been assigned in Harrenhal's keep. Queen Elia, for her part, resumed conversation with Oberyn and Dor and Martell, who teased her about the tournament's outcome. Aegon and Rhaenys, fatigued from the day's excitement, were escorted by septas to their chambers. Slowly, the hall's mood shifted from the rowdy cheer of a feast to smaller clusters of conversation, with only the hardest drinkers and revelers left in full merriment. Rhaegar was not prone to drunkenness or dancing all night. Instead, he found himself meandering through Harrenhal's corridors, half-lit by flickering torches. Painted walls gave way to massive, blackened stones once melted by dragon fire centuries ago. The hush of old ghosts weighed on the place. He remembered a younger self, traveling to Harrenhal for a legendary tourney that had ended up changing the fate of the realm. The shadows of the past seemed to coil around these walls. When at last he reached a small courtyard open to the night sky, he saw Ser Barristan and Selmy waiting. The famed knight wore neither helm nor cloak, just a simple padded doublet against the night's chill. Even so, there was something regal in the older man's bearing. Barristan gave a respectful bow. "Your Grace," he said softly, "I thought you might need a moment without all the eyes in there." Rhaegar managed a slight smile. "So you stand watch over me in the shadows?" Barristan shrugged, a modest, apologetic gesture. "You did me honor by keeping me in your king's guard after you ascended the throne, and I know well how the burden of power can press upon a man's soul. Sometimes a friend is needed, one not so entangled in politics." "I am grateful," Rhaegar admitted. He felt the swirl of music behind him, heard faint echoes in the courtyard. "I wonder if I will ever truly know peace. 5 years of calm is a blessing by any measure, yet I feel as if we stand on a thin sheet of ice, uncertain when it might crack beneath us." He exhaled. "Between the tenuous alliances, my father's legacy, and the old grudges that linger, it all feels so fragile." Barristan stepped forward, voice low. "Your father's tyranny and madness nearly tore the realm apart. You have done much to mend it. But you are not an all-seeing God, Your Grace. You are a man, and each step you take must be measured in the moment. The realm loves you well enough. Or if it does not love you, it at least respects you, and that is often enough for stability." Rhaegar closed his eyes and pictured the future. "We have children, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Jon. They will inherit whatever we build. I want them to see a realm united, not one that is forever a breath away from rebellion. Once, I believed fervently in prophecy, that the prince who was promised would unify the land against some great darkness. Even now, I cannot shake that conviction, but each day that passes with relative peace makes me wonder if that darkness still lurks in the far corners of the world." Barristan listened patiently, then inclined his head. "I have heard tales from the Night's Watch, whispers of strange sightings beyond the wall, of dire wolves in greater numbers, and fleeting glimpses of pale shapes in the snow. But the old stories say such dangers died out long ago. We do not know. Perhaps vigilance is wise, in case the ancient evils are not as dead as men believe." Rhaegar nodded, resolved. "I must keep an ear turned north. If ever the Watch cries out, we must not ignore them." They parted ways quietly, Barristan returning to the hall, Rhaegar lingering a moment longer under the moonlight. Through the silence, he heard a faint rustle behind him. A mouse skittering, or perhaps a distant footstep. But no threat emerged. The King of the Seven Kingdoms remained alone with his thoughts. In the morning, the bright sun glinted off the broken towers of Harrenhal, and the final day of the tourney proceeded with more spectacle. Archery contests, quarterstaff duels, more jousting in the improvised lists outside the castle's blackened walls. Rhaegar presided over it all with regal composure, awarding small purses of gold, exchanging pleasantries with the winners and commiserations with the vanquished. After midday, the champions lined up to receive their accolades, and the ground erupted in cheers for the final tilt's victor. a gallant knight from the Reach with a horse bedecked in golden roses. Rhaegar placed a laurel wreath upon the man's helm, then led the entire assembly in applause. Yet behind each flourish of pageantry, the real work of politics continued. Lord Paramounts huddled with their sworn bannermen, forging small alliances or renewing vows. Queen Elia quietly exchanged words with Lady Olenna Tyrell about matters of trade and betrothals. Lyanna Stark spoke, somewhat stiffly, to her distant Tully cousins. Eddard Stark lingered near his sister, watchful, ensuring no man looked askance at her or the dark-haired boy tugging at her skirts. Tywin Lannister was seldom far from a corner conversation, presumably finalizing arrangements of mutual benefit. King Rhaegar was never alone. The throng of courtiers seemed determined to keep him in their orbit, each with petitions or polite flatteries. One moment he was listening to a minor stormlord praising the reconstruction of certain roads. The next, a pair of hedge knights were humbly requesting royal favor in the next campaign to quell bandits near the Blackwater. Rhaegar answered them all with grace, though part of him longed to be free of the ceremonial trappings. When twilight fell, the tournament came to its official close. By dawn of the next day, lords began to depart, wagons rolling, horses saddled, sails readied for any who traveled by the Trident's waters. Rhaegar planned to linger a day longer with his retinue to allow his children and the others some respite before the journey home. He found Lyanna near a window in one of the high halls, Jon on her hip, the boy peering out at the departing pageantry. Outside, a column of knights in the banner of House Tarly galloped away along the lake road. Lyanna seemed lost in thought until she noticed Rhaegar's approach. "He's eager to ride off like that," she murmured, nodding at Jon, who stared wide-eyed at the gleaming armor passing below. "Sometimes he tries to climb every piece of furniture as if it's a horse. Maybe it's the wolf blood in him, he's bold." She gave a soft laugh. Rhaegar rested a hand on the boy's head. At his age, Aegon was the same, always wanting to grab a wooden sword and chase after Rhaenys. "I suspect he'll be unstoppable when he's grown." He studied Lyanna's face, the lines of her cheekbones. "Are you content here, truly?" "I ask because I know you speak often with Ned about Winterfell." She glanced away. "I miss the north at times. The quiet forests, the crisp air. We Starks aren't made for the heat of the south. And yet, I chose this path, though I didn't foresee the war that would follow. I cannot abandon Jon now to a place that might not want him or that might see him as a threat." There was a lingering sadness in her eyes. "I know the North would never harm a babe of Stark blood, but what about the rest? Southron lords, your father's old loyalists. At least with you as king, we have some protection." He exhaled, remembering the swirl of vicious politics that had almost consumed her before. "One day, the realm may be safe enough for you to travel back and forth freely without fear. Until then, let me know if there is anything I can do to ease your longing." He hesitated, then added, "I've considered visiting Winterfell myself to meet with Ned in his own seat and show respect to the North. A royal progress might help unify the realm further." Lyanna's brows rose in mild surprise, though there was no scorn in her voice. "Ned would welcome the chance, I think. He remains guarded, but he wants what's best for the North. Seeing you pay open respects, yes, it might go far. Just be mindful that some in the North still harbor ill feelings about my father and brother Brandon, how they were killed by your—" She stopped, the words hanging. "By Aerys." Rhaegar nodded somberly, the old guilt flickering in his heart. "Then I must tread carefully. But I will do it. Let the people see a different face of House Targaryen, one that does not come bearing fire and blood." In the days that followed, the Targaryen party departed Harrenhal and rode back toward King's Landing. The roads were in decent repair, thanks to the crown's recent attention. The peasants they passed along the way knelt or waved, some with genuine warmth, others with stoic caution. Rhaegar led the column, accompanied by some of his Kingsguard, Ser Barristan, Ser Jaime Lannister, who wore a thoughtful, somewhat haunted look whenever they passed through farmland dotted with little homes, and Ser Jonathan Darry. Queen Elia and Lyanna followed in separate wheelhouses, each accompanied by attendants, septas, and guards. The children giggled and pointed out sheep in the fields or the bright flutter of lark wings overhead. Now and again, Rhaegar would slow his horse to check on them. The atmosphere was calm, even cheerful at times, a marked contrast from the forced marches of wartime. Once they reached the city, the dust of the road gave way to the sprawling labyrinth of King's Landing, with its steep streets, the stench of the lower wards, and the clangor of commerce. The Red Keep's crimson walls came into view high on the hill, a reminder of the seat of Targaryen power. Trumpets heralded the king's return and the gold cloaks opened the gates wide. Within the keep's courtyard, courtiers rushed to greet them, fussing over the queen's comfort and the children's health. Lyanna, more a stranger in this realm of courtly manners, slipped off to her chambers with Jon before the crowd of sycophants could descend. The new routine of royal life resumed. Rhaegar chaired small council meetings, hearing updates on the treasury, the royal navy, the state of roads, and the intrigues among the great houses. Tywin Lannister took part rarely in these sessions now, but when he did, his presence was as sharp as a lion's tooth. Varys, the master of whisperers, glided in with quiet offers of information. Pycelle mumbled about the benefits of certain alliances. Connington listened intently and then brought forth lists of tasks for the crown to tackle next. The business was unending, the negotiation of trade pacts with Bravos, the need to settle a dispute between the Westerlands and the Reach over contested B. Order villages, and the delicate matter of the Stormlands' loyalty following Robert Baratheon's death. Some nights, Rhaegar sat alone in his solar, poring over ancient texts about the long night. A single candle flickered by his elbow as he traced lines of prophecy he'd once learned in cryptic references. Some said the second coming of darkness would be heralded by a bleeding star. Others claimed a dragon had to have 3 heads, an echoing refrain that had shaped Rhaegar's decisions. He knew many in the realm found such prophecy talk to be mystical nonsense, yet he could not banish it from his mind. He pictured the gloom beyond the wall, the desperate letters from the Night's Watch reporting whites or strange sightings, always inconclusive. Over time, though, the frequency of these letters dwindled, replaced by more mundane reports of wildlings or routine supply shortages. Perhaps there was no pressing threat from the far north, or perhaps the threat simply bided its time. Life in King's Landing settled into a kind of slow cycle: petitions in the throne room, banquets to honor visiting lords, the training of young princes and princesses, quiet negotiations behind closed doors. Queen Elia presided over courtesies and entertainments with her gentle poise, forging connections with the ladies of the court. Lyanna preferred to stay apart from the swirl, spending time with Jon in the gardens or riding into the countryside near the Blackwater, escorted by guards. Some nights, Rhaegar joined her, the two of them trotting on horseback under the starlight, recollecting how once, in a more innocent time, they had met amidst the blossoming of romance. They never spoke openly of the cost the realm had paid for that romance, but the memory shadowed their every word. As Jon grew older, so did Aegon and Rhaenys. The 3 Targaryen children were often found together, albeit under the watchful eyes of septas and sworn shields. The differences between them were obvious. Aegon had silver-gold hair, while Jon had the dark locks of a Stark, but their bond was that of siblings. They squabbled over wooden swords, they raced through corridors until a stern guard or a dismayed servant caught them, and they invented elaborate games of make-believe in which they were knights and ladies, or sometimes fearsome beasts. Rhaenys, the oldest, teased them both, but also played the role of mediator when tempers flared. Now and again, Rhaegar would watch them from a balcony and feel a pang of hope that these children, who might otherwise have been separated by war and hate, had a chance to grow in shared love. Beyond the palace walls, the small folk carried on with their daily struggles. Gold cloaks kept better order than in Aerys' reign, the markets bustled, and food prices stabilized thanks to a series of good harvests and the crown's efforts at improved trade. Rhaegar frequently conferred with the High Septon to maintain the faith's goodwill. He sponsored the rebuilding of septs in regions damaged by the war and funded charitable endeavors in Flea Bottom. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy to remind the common folk that this new Targaryen king was unlike his father. Yet not all news was bright. Rumors reached the Red Keep of renewed raiding by the Ironborn along the coasts of the Reach and the Westerlands. Lords Farman and Banefort sent hurried pleas for assistance. Rhaegar ordered the royal fleet readied, commanded by Lord Valerion, to patrol the waters and deter incursions. Meanwhile, the Lannisters saw an opportunity to prove their strength. Lord Tywin dispatched a portion of his formidable gold and crimson host to watch the coasts. For a time, that check on the Iron Islands sufficed, and Balon Greyjoy's ambitions remained curbed. Still, watchers in the Red Keep speculated that a greater storm might come if the Ironborn grew bolder. Rhaegar considered sending an emissary to Pike, but the thought of kneeling to Balon's arrogance turned his stomach. Instead, he wrote a formal warning. Should the raids continue, the crown would respond with fire. One day, at court, the matter of the North arose in earnest. Ned Stark's letter arrived, sealed with the direwolf sigil, politely inviting the king to visit Winterfell for a grand feast. An opportunity to see the North's progress and reaffirm loyalty. Rhaegar accepted without hesitation. Word spread that the king would embark on a royal progress northward, bringing a modest retinue rather than the entire might of the court. Preparations began at once. Horses, carriages, enough guards to maintain dignity and security, but not so many as to appear threatening. Queen Elia decided to remain in King's Landing with Rhaenys, citing the girl's lessons and her own duties. Aegon, however, begged to come, enthralled by the tales of dire wolves and cold forests. Rhaegar agreed, much to the boy's delight, and Lyanna would of course come too with Jon. The journey north took weeks. They passed through the Riverlands, where Edmure Tully greeted them warmly at Riverrun, offering the hospitality of his great hall. Rhaegar noted how the scars of war had largely faded from the countryside. Fields were in healthy condition, peasants well-fed. Lord Hoster and Edmure walked Rhaegar along the ramparts, proudly showing repairs that had been made to the castle's outer fortifications. In the great feast that followed, toasts were made to the memory of the fallen, and Rhaegar reaffirmed the crown's gratitude for House Tully's renewed loyalty. Lyanna was polite to them, though an undercurrent of tension always appeared whenever talk turned to the days of the rebellion. Nobody openly spoke of the fact that Brandon Stark and Catelyn Tully had once been betrothed. Some wounds were best left in the silent gloom of the past. From Riverrun, the party pressed on into the Neck, navigating the causeways that snaked through the swamps. Crannogmen peered from half-submerged huts, curious about the king's passing. Rhaegar found it a strange land, humid and filled with the cries of marsh birds. Lyanna seemed pensive, remembering old stories that once frightened and fascinated her as a girl, tales of lizard lions lurking in the waters. And then, at last, the air grew cooler, the road firmer, and the party emerged into the wide open spaces of the north. In the distance, the looming shape of the ancient castle rose, gray walls blending into the stony hills. Winterfell stood proud under a sky that threatened rain. Ned Stark awaited them at the gates with his household clad in cloaks of dark wool. Nearby, the direwolf banner flapped in a gust of wind. Beside Ned stood his wife, Lady Catelyn Tully Stark, regal in her own way with auburn hair braided back. Their child, a dark-haired toddler named Robb, clung to Catelyn's skirts while peeking at the visitors. Ned's expression was calm, though the presence of a Targaryen retinue in Winterfell was an event of some magnitude. The king's standard, dragon black and red, fluttered just behind Rhaegar's horse. As soon as they drew near, Ned bowed. "Your Grace, we welcome you to Winterfell. My home is yours for as long as you'll stay." Rhaegar dismounted, helping Aegon down, and then extended a hand to Lyanna, who followed with Jon in her arms. The hush in the courtyard was palpable, as if the gathered men and women realized how extraordinary this moment was, the Stark daughter returning not as a kidnapped maiden but as a consort to the Targaryen king with a child of their blood in her arms. Rhaegar inclined his head, choosing his words carefully. "Lord Stark, I thank you. Winterfell is famed for its hospitality. We come in peace and gratitude, eager to see the North with our own eyes and strengthen our bond." Ned met his gaze. "The North stands with the crown, Your Grace. We have not forgotten war, but we have seen the value of peace." Then his gray eyes flickered to Lyanna, and a hint of relief or perhaps sorrow passed across his features. "Welcome home, sister," he said softly. Lyanna lowered her head in acknowledgement, a swirl of emotion in her eyes as she glanced at the cobblestones where she had once played as a girl. Catelyn offered a courteous curtsy. "Welcome to Winterfell, Your Grace. Lady Lyanna, it warms my heart to see you again after so long." She studied Jon for a moment with polite curiosity, then shifted her attention to Aegon, who stood with a slight flush in his cheeks, uncertain how to greet the lady. "And this must be Prince Aegon," she said. "We have prepared rooms for your party. You must be weary from travel." Rhaegar nodded and then gestured for his retinue to follow the Stark servants who came forward. "Your generosity is appreciated. We will not impose upon you for too long, but my son and I have wished to see the wonders of the North." A modest feast was prepared that evening in the great hall of Winterfell. The hall's huge hearths roared with flames, casting flickering light across the long wooden tables. Venison, fish from the white knife, stews of carrots and onions, and the ubiquitous northern bread loaves were laid out in abundance. The conversation at first was formal, household matters, travel anecdotes, polite inquiries about the roads. Rhaegar sat at the head table beside Ned and Catelyn, with Lyanna nearby, while their children were placed more modestly off to one side, watched over by septas and maids. The northern lords who had come to pay homage to the king formed a somber assembly. The glowering Lord Bolton, the stout Lord Manderley, the fierce Lady Meage Mormont, and several others. Each offered words of respect, but Rhaegar sensed the same underlying caution that Ned displayed. He did his best to ease their wariness, asking about local conditions, listening seriously to the concerns about trade routes and the difficulties of sending goods south. Lord Manderley, ever eager to talk about fish and commerce, warmed to the subject, explaining how White Harbor could be an even greater port if the Crown supported the dredging of a deeper channel. Rhaegar promised to consider it, taking mental notes. Meanwhile, Lady Meage Mormont bluntly suggested more patrols were needed at sea to deter pirate raids near Bear Island. She had no patience for the Crown's indecision over the Ironborn. Kill them or contain them was her pragmatic motto, and Rhaegar nodded gravely, acknowledging the ongoing concerns. Overall, the atmosphere was not precisely cheerful, but neither was it hostile. The North seemed resigned to Targaryen rule under a more benevolent king, even if old memories of war and burnt fathers still lurked. Lyanna's presence at Winterfell stirred greater emotion behind closed doors. After the feast, Ned found her alone in the Godswood, standing near the heart tree, which glowed red beneath the torchlight. Rhaegar observed them from a discreet distance, not wishing to intrude on a sibling reunion. He saw Ned's arm around his sister's shoulders, saw her tilt her head against him. No words drifted across the gentle murmur of the weirwood leaves, but Rhaegar guessed it was a moment of quiet acceptance between them. He hoped it would serve to heal some measure of the old grief. On the following day, Ned gave the king a private tour of Winterfell's crypts, a solemn courtesy for a Targaryen, but Ned had offered it. The descending steps felt cool and damp, torches casting dancing shadows on the carved figures. Statues of ancient Stark lords flanked the halls, their stone direwolves at their feet, iron swords across their laps. Rhaegar felt a chill unrelated to the cold air. These were the remnants of a line older than Targaryens in Westeros, the kings of winter who had once ruled an entire half of the land. Now they knelt to the dragon throne. He thought of how easily that arrangement might have shifted if the rebellion had gone differently. They stopped near two newer statues. One depicted Lord Rhaegar Stark, another Brandon Stark. The older man's effigy wore a solemn expression carved with chisels that tried to capture paternal gravity. Brandon's statue showed a face more spirited. The swords at their laps glinted with faint candlelight. Ned bowed his head, and Rhaegar stood silent, feeling the weight of the past. "My father and brother," Ned said quietly, "burned by Aerys. I wanted you to see them. Not to blame you, just so you understand the North's pain." Rhaegar's voice was low. "I do understand, Lord Stark, and I wish I could undo it." A faint echo of footsteps in the darkness made him glance back. No one else had followed them down. He fixed Ned with a sober look. "I cannot bring them back, but I can strive to rule in a way that honors their memory by preventing such atrocities from ever occurring again." Ned pressed his lips together. "Then that is all we ask. The North doesn't forget, but we can forgive in time if your rule remains just." Rhaegar gave a curt nod, eyes drifting to the carved direwolves at the statue's feet. "Thank you for showing me this," he murmured. "I will remember." They ascended from the crypts in silence, emerging into the courtyard where the world felt alive again, filled with the scent of pine and the bustle of stable boys. Rhaegar left Ned to his duties and returned to the keep. There, he found Aegon excitedly chattering to Lyanna about the training yard. The boy had peered out a window and seen men-at-arms practicing archery and swordplay in the crisp northern air. "Father, may I watch? May I try the bow?" Aegon asked, bright-eyed. His silver-gold hair caught the daylight. Rhaegar smiled faintly. "Very well. Only watch it first. Speak to the master-at-arms. If he allows you to draw a small bow, then do so under his supervision." Jon, who stood clutching Lyanna's hand, piped up, "Me too." His own eyes shone at the thought of running around with the older boys. Lyanna squeezed his hand. "Not quite yet, sweetling. You're smaller than Aegon." "Soon enough." Jon pouted, but the promise that eventually he would learn seemed to comfort him. Rhaegar ruffled the boy's hair and nodded to the stable courtyard. "We'll see about letting you ride a pony later." That brightened Jon's face considerably. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Winterfell grew subtly warmer. The Northmen saw that Rhaegar's courtesy was genuine, that he listened patiently to their counsel. They observed Aegon's excitement for the training yard and recognized that the boy was not a haughty princeling but an eager child who liked the ring of steel on steel. Some of the guards even took him under gentle instruction, showing him how to notch an arrow or hold a wooden practice sword. Meanwhile, Lyanna and Jon walked through the Godwood every morning, reacquainting themselves with the scents of pine needles and the quiet hush of the glassy pool beneath the heart tree. Lady Catelyn sometimes joined them, curious about her sister-by-law, and though they were not fast friends, a cautious respect began to grow. Ned did his best to host lavish meals each night, inviting lesser lords from across the north who had traveled to meet the king. Skins of strong northern ale were tapped, and the toasts sometimes grew raucous, but Rhaegar maintained his regal composure with just enough humor to avoid appearing distant. A few of those nights, after the meal, he and Ned sat by the largest hearth, listening to a bard's low chanting of old songs, some about the kings of winter, others about the Undul invasion. Occasionally, Rhaegar offered a gentle correction when a verse about Targaryens was too twisted by rumor. Ned would nod, allowing the southern version of events to mingle with the north's perspective. The embers in the hearth glowed as these two men, once on opposite sides of a bloody war, found a fragile camaraderie in the quiet hours. One evening, as the wind howled beyond the walls and snow threatened to swirl down from gray clouds, a new letter arrived by Raven. It bore the seal of the Night's Watch, the black wax stamped with a sword in darkness. Ned opened it in Rhaegar's presence, brow furrowing. Lord Commander Corgyle writes that the Watch's scouts have seen unsettling movements in the far north, more sightings of undead animals, strange footprints in the snow. They can't confirm. Wildlings speak of an awakening in the frost, Ned read. He asks if we can spare men or supplies. Rhaegar felt his pulse quicken. The old stories had spoken of the others of White Walkers leading an army of the dead during the long night. But that was thousands of years ago, assumed to be legend. Then again, he recalled the rumors that had trickled in from time to time. We must not dismiss these warnings, Rhaegar said firmly. The Night's Watch is sworn to guard against threats beyond the wall. If they suspect danger, we should see them provisioned. Steel, food, reinforcements if needed. Ned frowned thoughtfully. The North has always honored that vow. But the Watch has so few men now, just a shadow of its old strength. Even if their fears are overstated, it's wise to keep them strong. I can spare some men from Winterfell's garrison for a time and some supplies. I'll see the crown provides coin for more, Rhaegar said. We could send a contingent of the royal army north to the wall, perhaps. At least for a season. If it turns out to be nothing more than wildling raids, so be it. Ned nodded. We can speak more with the Lord Commander. If he truly believes there's a supernatural threat, we'll face it. But I'm cautious, Your Grace. Some of these tales might be the usual panic that grips men in the far wastes of the Frostfangs. He folded the letter. Still, I appreciate that you don't dismiss it outright. Rhaegar's gaze drifted to the high windows where swirling flakes of snow began to tap against the glass. The realm stood unprepared for the rebellion that nearly shattered it, unprepared for my father's madness. Let us not be unprepared for this if it proves real. And so they decided. Messages were sent back to King's Landing instructing Jon Connington to gather a modest force of 1,000 men, well-trained, loyal, with ample supplies, to be dispatched to Castle Black. The letter asked that they move swiftly before winter storms could hinder them. Meanwhile, Ned would contribute an equal number from the north. In this way, the Watch would receive a bolstered presence, enough to patrol widely and investigate any real threat. If it turned out to be only spooked wildlings or rumors, well, the men could be recalled in the spring. That matter settled, Rhaegar felt an odd sense of purpose. Years ago, he had obsessed over prophecy, certain that an existential threat would require a unified realm under a worthy leader. Now, perhaps that threat was stirring. He did not wish for doom, but neither could he ignore the tingle of fate on his skin. If a dire menace did rise beyond the wall, the realm would be stronger now than it had been under a mad king, fractured by rebellion. And if it did not, they lost nothing by caution. That night, another feast was held in Winterfell's Great Hall, less formal than the previous ones. Northern men told bawdy stories, the minstrels sang both southern and northern ballads, and the children raced around the edges of the gathering until the grown-ups forced them to bed. Rhaegar found a spot near the hearth, sipping mulled wine, listening to the swirl of conversation. Lyanna joined him after a while, looking thoughtful. I visited my old room today, she said quietly. It feels smaller than I remembered. Childhood illusions, I suppose. Rhaegar brushed a hand along hers. Do you think you'll ever want to stay here permanently? He asked, the question hovering between them. Lyanna stared at the flames. I don't know, she admitted. Jon has grown used to King's Land. The mild winters, the busy streets, the Red Keep's corridors. But I also sense the pull of the North in his blood. Maybe someday. She lifted her eyes to meet his. No matter what, I won't tear him away from you. He deserves a father's presence, just as he deserves to know his Stark roots. That's my only wish, that he have both. Rhaegar nodded, feeling the complexity of it settle in his chest. His wife Elia accepted Jon as part of Rhaegar's family, but the arrangement was always going to be fragile in the eyes of lords who prized pure lineage. It was a dance of courtesy, rumor, and quiet tension. "We'll ensure he has that balance," Rhaegar said softly. "I promise." A movement to the side caught his eye, Ned approaching. The Lord of Winterfell beckoned for Rhaegar to join him across the hall, where a small group of Northern Bannermen waited. Rhaegar excused himself and walked over, adopting his polite regal composure. One of the men, an older knight with graying hair, bowed deeply. "Your Grace, I am Ser Bartimus of Housenot, sworn to Ned Stark. I have come from our holdfast near the Wolfswood with word that an entire village was found empty. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, just gone. The men left all their tools behind, their huts were left with fires still smoking." Rhaegar's brow furrowed. "When was this?" 2 weeks past, perhaps 3. "We sent trackers. They found footprints heading deeper into the Wolfswood toward the mountains, but the trail vanished in a fresh snowfall. No one has returned. We suspect wildlings or bandits may have forced them to flee." Ned exchanged a grim glance with Rhaegar. "Bandits are rare in that region, but not impossible. Still, it troubles me. Did the trackers say anything else? Any sign of fighting blood?" Ser Bartimus shook his head. "No blood, no overturned wagons, just abandoned homes. As if the folk gathered their families and walked away in haste but not in panic." Rhaegar felt a chill prickle along his spine. "We will look into it. The new troops being sent to the Watch can be diverted to investigate these vanishings if the Watch commander agrees. In the meantime, be on your guard." The older knight bowed his thanks, and Rhaegar touched Ned's shoulder. "Keep me informed, Lord Stark. If something is amiss in the Wolfswood, we cannot let it fester." Ned nodded. "Agreed. I'll dispatch my own riders soon to see if the missing villagers can be found." Though the matter was not resolved, the feast continued, leaving Rhaegar with an unsettling feeling that something lurked beyond the edges of the firelight. He forced himself to smile and mingle, to reassure the northern lords that the crown took this seriously. Lyanna, aware of his tension, watched him with concern from the sidelines but did not interrupt. In the morning, as the final day of their stay dawned, a fresh blanket of snow lay across Winterfell's roofs. The courtyard turned white and quiet under the pale sky. Ned and Rhaegar walked the battlements, discussing how best to deal with the Wolfswood rumor and the possibility of more vanishings. Rhaegar realized then how precarious the north could be. The distances were vast, the population sparse. If trouble came in the winter months, answers might arrive too late. "This is why your wards and watchers must be well provisioned," Rhaegar said. "If I can enlarge the crown's support each year, fortifying key northern holdfasts, it may prevent a crisis." Ned nodded, gazing over the white expanse. "The North welcomes that, so long as we remain free to govern ourselves. We do not want Southern knights posted on every road, telling us how to live." Rhaegar gave him a measured smile. "I understand. You have my word. You will not lose your autonomy. We only wish to keep the realm safe." Their goodbyes came with mutual respect, though not quite warmth. Ned and his household escorted Rhaegar's retinue to the gates, and Lyanna lingered in a final embrace with her brother. Snow drifted around them, and for an instant, Rhaegar wondered if she would stay. But she eventually climbed into the carriage with Jon, giving Ned a faint smile. "Until next time," she said, "take care of the North. And yourself." The king and his companions rode south again, accompanied by a small northern escort until they reached the outskirts of the Neck. Aegon babbled excitedly about the archery yard and the possibility of seeing real direwolves someday. Jon, only a few years younger, listened wide-eyed, nodding as if imagining the day he would hold a bough or roam those mysterious forests. Rhaegar listened to his sons and felt a pull on his heart, equal parts pride and concern. The kingdom was large and complicated, and these children would inherit all its promises and perils. As they made their slow return, word arrived from the capital. Cunnington had begun to muster the 1,000 men for the Night's Watch's relief force. Ships would sail them from White Harbor around to Eastwatch by the sea, while others would march by land if needed. The planning was in motion. Winter would come, sooner or later, and the realm must be prepared. By the time the king's procession neared King's Landing, it was late autumn, and the air over the Crownlands was crisp but not harsh. Smoke rose from village chimneys, and farmers gleaned the last harvest. Rhaegar noticed how the city had grown in prosperity these past 5 years. New shops, more robust trade, fewer signs of war's ruin. At the sight of the Red Keep, though, his heart caught with an old pang. The memories of his father's final days still haunted these walls. But it was his domain now. He intended to keep it a better place. They were greeted at the gates by Elia Martell, clad in a dark blue cloak embroidered with subtle suns and spears. She embraced Aegon warmly and kissed Rhaegar's cheek, welcoming him home. Her eyes flicked to Lyanna and Jon, and she offered them a courteous nod. Lyanna responded in kind. It was the practiced dance they had perfected, acknowledgement without warmth, coexistence without intimacy. Yet nothing outwardly marred the peace. Rhaenys came running, squealing happily to see her father and brother again, and at once the illusions of normalcy settled back over the Targaryen household. Life in the Red Keep resumed its pace. Rhaegar met with Connington, who reported that the men heading for the wall were nearly ready, just awaiting a final muster. One detail was disturbing: some of the recruits had deserted. They heard the rumors of whites and White Walkers and decided they'd rather vanish than march so far north in winter, Connington said, exasperated. I'll replace them, but it slows things. Rhaegar scowled thoughtfully. Speak with the City Watch. Anyone found deserting can be seized for questioning. I won't force them north if they quake at rumors, but I want to ensure no sabotage is at play. We can't let fear unravel our plans. Connington bowed in agreement and left to handle the matter. Queen Elia resumed her daily gatherings, entertaining ambassadors from the free cities and discussing trade expansions. She kept a close watch on Rhaenys' lessons, determined that the girl would be as learned as any prince. Lyanna, meanwhile, returned to her quieter life, walking the ramparts with Jon or reading the old stories in the library tower. She found companionship in a few ladies of the court who shared her interest in hawking, and occasionally they ventured outside the city to practice with falcons. The Watchers gossiped, of course, the king's second consort off on another excursion wearing gray furs reminiscent of the north. But as the years had passed, such gossip lost its sting. Most courtiers knew the arrangement was not going to change. Word came from White Harbor that a crown fleet had set sail, bearing half the relief force for the Watch. The rest marched by land, traveling through the Neck and onward, carrying supplies of grain, salted meat, warm cloaks, and weapons. Rhaegar studied the reports daily, half expecting some fiasco or meltdown, but things progressed steadily. Lord Commander Corgyle's messages expressed gratitude. Then, on a cold day that hinted of deeper winter, another raven arrived from the north. Ned Stark's words were brief but urgent. More villages vanished near the shivering forest west of the last river. Tracks found, some leading nowhere. No bodies. The rangers of the Watch suspected supernatural involvement. Tensions among local lords rose, fear spreading. Rhaegar read the letter in silence, knuckles whitening on the parchment. He summoned a council at once, with Connington, Barristan, Varys, Pycelle, and several others. Tywin Lannister was not present. He had returned to Casterly Rock some weeks prior, but had left behind a trusted aide. Rhaegar's voice was steady as he read the letter aloud, though inside, alarm flared. If the Watch's fear is correct, we face more than simple bandits. Even if it's not the White Walkers, something is terrifying these villagers. I want a second contingent prepared, perhaps a few hundred men, to reinforce or investigate. Pycelle cleared his throat. Your Grace, are we certain these are not mere rumors? The north is vast, and winter's approach can sow all manner of hysteria. Rhaegar leveled a cool look at the old maester. We are not certain. That is precisely why we must respond swiftly. I will not repeat the mistakes of the past by ignoring warnings until it is too late. Connington nodded. I can pull some men from the Crownland's garrisons along with experienced rangers from the Stormlands. We'll give them orders to link up with Stark's men. If it's truly something beyond mortal understanding, his voice trailed off uneasily. Ser Barristan bowed. If it pleases your Grace, I would volunteer to lead some portion of this force. My blade is sworn to defend the realm from all threats. Rhaegar considered it with gratitude. Your experience would be invaluable, Ser Barristan, but I need you here for now. I rely on you for the security of the crown. Let us send men we trust, but I cannot spare all my best knights at once. The realm still needs stable guardianship in the capital. Barristan inclined his head, accepting the king's reasoning, though disappointment glimmered in his eyes. Pycelle muttered something about rational resource allocation, but Rhaegar waved it aside. Very well, Jon Connington, you shall select a capable commander for this new force. Consult with Lord Stark. We must act with unity. After the meeting, Rhaegar retreated to his solar, mind spinning with possibilities. Lyanna found him there, gazing into the embers of a fireplace. "You've heard from Ned," she guessed quietly. "Tell me the truth of it." He told her the vanishings and the Watcher's suspicions. She listened in silence, then placed a hand on his arm. "If something stirs in the cold, my brother will stand firm. But I fear for our people. For Jon. For Aegon and Rhaenys too. We are so far away in King's Landing, yet winter creeps down from the north." Rhaegar took her hand. "I have no intention of letting the realm stand idle. If we must fight a threat beyond legends, we will do so united." As the weeks turned into months, a chill settled over the land. Winter had not officially been declared by the Maesters, but it pressed at the edges of autumn, promising ice and snow in the near future. Reports trickled in from the royal forces and the Night's Watch, though little was confirmed about the missing villagers. The men found abandoned huts, no signs of bloodshed. Some tracks looked as if the folk simply walked away. That only sparked more frightful rumors. An unease spread across the north, and even in the southern courts, lords whispered that King Rhaegar was mobilizing for a phantom threat. The Iron Islands, meanwhile, grew emboldened. Balon Greyjoy seemed to sense that the crown's attention was northward, so reaving ships harried the coastlines anew, striking small ports along the Westerlands and the Reach. Tywin Lannister responded with immediate severity, dispatching more warships from Lannisport. Rhaegar supported him with part of the royal fleet, though that left fewer ships to guard the eastern coast or the route to White Harbor. Tension built. The realm was pulled in two directions, north and west, and Rhaegar had to maintain a balance, reminding the Ironborn that he would not tolerate open rebellion while also reinforcing the north. It was at this juncture that Tywin Lannister returned to King's Landing for discussions. He arrived with a retinue of Lannister guards and his children, Cersei and Jaime. Jaime, of course, was already a member of the King's Guard, but had been sent briefly west on some errand. Cersei was rumored to be in her early 20s now, dazzling in her pride and ambition. She wore gowns of Lannister red that set off her golden hair and moved through the court with a feline grace that reminded Rhaegar uncomfortably of Tywin himself. In a private audience, Tywin pressed the king to wage a punishing campaign against the Iron Islands to break their power once and for all. "If we delay, Balon Greyjoy will only grow bolder. A show of force is needed," Tywin insisted. "Otherwise, we risk encouraging other malcontents to test your rule." Rhaegar sighed. "I do not disagree that the Ironborn are testing their limits. But we have pressing matters in the north. If the rumors prove true, it could be a threat the entire realm must face. I cannot pour all my resources into a seaborne invasion of the Iron Islands when I may need them to fight the undead." Tywin's lip curled slightly. "The undead. Forgive me, your grace, if I place more weight on the threats that I can see than on old wives' tales." Rhaegar's temper flared, but he kept calm. "Lord Stark has confirmed unusual occurrences. The Night's Watch has no reason to invent such stories. My father once ignored omens, dismissed counsel. I will not repeat his mistakes." Tywin's green eyes glimmered with annoyance. "Very well. But the moment you confirm that these vanishings are natural in origin, wildlings or some disease, I trust you will unleash your fleet on the Iron Islands. The realm cannot stand idle." Rhaegar inclined his head. "I will do what is necessary to protect the realm. In the meantime, do all you can to guard the western shores. I will lend you additional ships if the situation escalates." They parted with a measure of tension. Rhaegar felt the old constraints of politics close around him like iron bands. He conferred with Cannington and the small council, reaffirming their cautious stance. Meanwhile, ravens arrived from the Watchers in the north, stating that the combined force of Crown and Northmen had pushed beyond the wall, found some wildlings who spoke of dead things in the woods, but no direct proof of walkers. Some men returned spooked, babbling about corpses that vanished in the night. Others scoffed, claiming the stories were the product of overactive imaginations in the cold. The vanishings continued sporadically, but no new evidence presented itself. Doubt crept into the minds of many a court. Perhaps these were indeed just wildling raids or migrations. One afternoon, Rhaegar stood on a balcony overlooking the city, staring at the ribbons of smoke curling up from chimneys. The sky was overcast, a gray that threatened rain. He heard a soft footstep behind him and turned to see Elia Martell. She moved with careful grace, her expression gentle. "You've been troubled of late," she said. "The burdens of the realm weigh on you. Tell me how I can help." He sighed, resting both hands on the stone balustrade. "I fear scattering our strength. The Ironborn reave in the west, the north calls for more men, and here in King's Landing we must remain vigilant. Yet if I fail in any one place, we risk revolt or devastation. Worse, the realm grows uncertain. They look at me and see the memory of my father's madness, wondering if I too will prove unfit under pressure." Elia touched his arm. You are not your father. You are Rhaegar, who ended a war, who brought new hope to the realm. The lords may grumble, but I have seen their hearts. They trust you more than you realize. Even Tywin Lannister only tests your resolve. He does not truly question your authority. He looked into her dark eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude for her steady support. It helps hearing you say so. Thank you. He paused. There is still the matter of the king's children. Aegon has grown strong and Rhaenys blossoms day by day. Yet I must think of alliances. Sometimes I wonder if we should betroth one of them, perhaps Rhaenys, to a great house to bind them more firmly to the crown. The Martells are already close, but what of the Starks, Tullis, or Lannisters? Elia considered. A marriage pact could be wise, but perhaps wait until the storms pass. Let us not gamble with the children's futures in a time of such uncertainty. Still, we might open quiet negotiations, gauge interest. The realm might approve of a union that cements ties with the North. She gave him a subtle, reassuring smile. We have time. Rhaenys is still young. He nodded, mind turning over possibilities. Cersei Lannister's name flitted through his thoughts, though that was no longer an option for Rhaegar himself. Tywin had once dreamed of wedding her to a king. Now it might be an option for Aegon, but the boy was still a child. Or perhaps a match with House Tyrell or House Arryn would stabilize the lines further. The puzzle was endless. He was grateful that Elia did not seem threatened by these dynastic considerations. She had always been pragmatic, understanding that royal marriages served the realm as well as the heart. The uneasy winter crept on. Snow dusted the riverlands, chilled the north, but the heartlands remained mostly clear. The king's men at the wall continued their patrols, hearing wild tales but capturing no conclusive proof. Balon Greyjoy still raided shipping lanes, ignoring the crown's warnings. Tywin Lannister pressed for action. Meanwhile, rumors sprang up that in the far east, beyond the narrow sea, the Dothraki Khalasars stirred restlessly, as if the world beyond Westeros might also shift under them. Rhaegar could not address every threat at once. He believed strongly that the realm was best served by focusing on its own borders first, ensuring no more immediate fracturing. As the new year dawned, the Citadel declared that winter had officially arrived, though it was predicted to be mild by northern standards. Still, the days shortened, the nights turned frigid, and travelers huddled closer to the hearths. King Rhaegar spent more time in the library tower, cross-referencing ancient manuscripts about the others, reading the works of septons who had once studied the arcane histories. He took notes, searching for a clue. Sometimes he stayed up so late that a bleary-eyed page would have to rouse him in the morning. One night, Lyanna ventured into the library, finding him slumped over a tome. She gently shook him awake, and he blinked at her. "It's late," she said softly. "Jon is asleep. So is Aegon. Elia retired hours ago. Are you still obsessing over these old scrolls?" He rubbed his eyes. "I am. You must think me mad." She pulled up a small stool. "Perhaps a bit single-minded. But I remember how you once spoke about prophecy. The prince that was promised, the long night. You believed our child might be part of something greater." Her voice was not accusatory, only curious. "Do you still believe that?" Rhaegar's gaze drifted to the flickering candle. "I do not know truly. Jon is only a boy. A sweet, earnest boy who loves ponies and tries to catch sparrows in the yard. Aegon is more eager with a sword. Rhaenys is full of laughter. Could one of them be the hero reborn? Or was it all just a dream?" Lyanna rested her hand on his. "If darkness truly comes, they will each play their part. So will we, and so will every lord who can wield a sword. I don't think prophecy will solve all problems. We must prepare in practical ways, as you are doing, men-at-arms, alliances, watchfulness." He nodded. "Yes, you're right. I only wish these scrolls offered more concrete help. They're half legends, half nonsense." He closed the book. "Thank you for reminding me that we have living children to guide, not mythical saviors." A faint smile touched her lips. "They are children, but that does not mean they cannot be heroes in their own way when the time comes." They left the library, extinguishing the candles, the shadows of old texts falling silent behind them. In the weeks that followed, Rhaegar continued the balancing act of ruling. The second contingent was sent north, commanded by a stout-hearted crown knight named Ser Miles Mandrick, rumored to be adept at fighting in harsh conditions. Tywin Lannister grudgingly agreed to keep the west safe until the realm could spare more resources. Barrist and Selmy drilled the city watch so thoroughly that King's Landing felt more secure than it had in a century. A tapestry of tension wove itself across Westeros, but no single thread snapped into outright war. Then, in the deep heart of winter's quiet, a letter came by Raven from Eastwatch by the Sea. It was penned by Lord Commander Corgyle of the Watch. His words were hasty, nearly frantic. A scouting party had encountered something horrifying beyond the wall, pale figures with glowing blue eyes, leading an army of dead men. Most of the scouts had perished. The few survivors retreated in terror, claiming that steel was useless, that only dragaglass or fire had any effect. The others are real, Corgyle's trembling script declared. We need aid. We need men. We need dragon fire if you possess it. The long night may come again. Gods help us all. Rhaegar read the letter in stunned silence, the hairs on his neck rising. He called an emergency session of the small council, his voice grim as he relayed the contents. Men around the table exchanged alarmed glances. Some, like Pycelle, paled and sputtered protests. Varys pressed his fingertips together thoughtfully. Connington looked stricken but resolute. The old stories, the vanishings, everything pointed to a looming crisis. If the others truly marched, the realm's petty squabbles would pale in comparison. Rhaegar felt that old conviction flare in his chest. This was the threat he had always feared. We must unite all the great houses, he said. Summon them to a grand council. We cannot let the Iron Islands or the Westerlands or any region stand apart. If the others come for us, they come for us all. Swift ravens flew from the Red Keep, bearing the king's summons. Another raven soared to Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen, which Rhaegar seldom used except for ritual. He wondered if old records might hold knowledge of how Aegon the Conqueror or the Valyrians had battled unnatural foes. He commanded men to search the catacombs, rummaging for anything about dragaglass or lost caches of wildfire. The entire capital buzzed with fearful speculation. Days passed in an agonizing wait. Then answers trickled back. Ned Stark confirmed the Watch's sightings, describing corpses that walked, eyes alight with eerie cold. He promised to muster every able-bodied man in the north. The Vale and the Riverlands, likewise, pledged forces. The Tyrells responded with cautious support, though they worried about leaving the Reach unguarded from Iron-born raids. The Lannisters, too, promised men if the threat was confirmed. Even Dorne readied spears, spurred by Elaya's urging and Oberyn's bold spirit. Westeros, it seemed, might truly unite under the Targaryen banner to face a nightmare not seen in millennia. Yet Balon Greyjoy remained silent. No raven came from Pike acknowledging the king's summons. Intelligence suggested the Ironborn were continuing their raids, unconcerned or perhaps disbelieving any tales of ice demons. Rhaegar had no time for them now. He had to protect the realm from a greater danger. If the Ironborn sought to exploit the crisis, they would be harshly dealt with later. First, the living had to survive. Winter deepened, snows drifting across the north and creeping into the Riverlands. The crown mobilized. Barristan Selmy led a portion of the Royal Knights northward, including squadrons of archers and pike. Connington stayed behind to manage the capital's defense. Rhaegar prepared to journey as well, intending to lead the united army. He knew the power of a king's presence on the battlefield. Elia, anxious for his safety, wanted him to remain in King's Landing, but he refused. If the others marched, how could he command from afar? Aegon pleaded to go, brandishing a child's sword, but Rhaegar denied him. You are not yet grown, he said gently. I need you safe to preserve our line if I fall. Stay with your mother and sister. Aegon's eyes glistened with frustrated tears. Rhaenys tried to comfort him. Lyanna, for her part, insisted she would not let Rhaegar face this alone, but he gently forbade her. I must ride to war, not host a court. Jon needs you here, he said. She argued at first, but eventually relented, knowing her presence in the front lines would serve little purpose beyond worry. Return to the north only if we hold them, he told her softly. She nodded, though her expression was taut with concern. Thus did King Rhaegar Targaryen prepare for a campaign beyond any living memory, a campaign not for gold or crowns but for the survival of mankind. He left the Red Keep under Elaya's governance, with Connington guiding the war efforts from the rear. The king himself led his personal guard and a host of thousands up the King's Road. Along the way, knights and levies from the Crownlands joined, forming a column of armed men stretching for miles. The air was bitterly cold, each breath a plume of white. Snow fell more frequently the farther north they traveled, muffling the land in a hush. Yet hope flickered in many hearts. The realm had never been so united in living memory. Banners from Tully, Arryn, Tyrell, Lannister, even Baratheon loyalists marched under the Targaryen dragon. The need was dire enough to set aside old grudges. As they neared Moat Cailin, Rhaegar's vanguard joined with Ned Stark's forces. The sight was awe-inspiring, thousands of Northmen in furs and leathers, grim-faced but resolute, welcoming the king in a rough, stoic fashion. Ned embraced Rhaegar before the assembled lords, signifying an alliance that would have been unimaginable years past. Even the prickly Lord Bolton pledged men, his pale eyes flicking with something like reluctant respect. From there, the combined host pressed forward, heading for the wall itself. Word traveled swiftly. Lords from the Vale under Robert Arryn, with Jon Arryn guiding him, would meet them near the last river. The river lords behind Edmure Tully were en route, though slowed by snow. Tywin Lannister had promised a fraction of his forces, but the main body was pinned dealing with the Ironborn. Meanwhile, the Tyrell contingent marched from the west, intending to cross the Neck and join near Winterfell. It was a massive, unwieldy movement of men and supplies. Camp after camp sprang up along the road, lines of tents bracing against the cold. Rhaegar ensured distribution of provisions was orderly, that no small folk were trampled. The king's presence maintained discipline. He rode among the soldiers, encouraging them, hearing their concerns, forging a sense of common purpose. Winterfell bustled with armies. The courtyard overflowed with horses and wagons. Ned's face was drawn but determined as he welcomed ally after ally. Lady Catelyn and her children helped coordinate the monstrous logistics of feeding so many. Rhaegar admired the quiet efficiency of the northern households who had prepared for winter emergencies. Yet none had prepared for a war of the living against the dead. Nightly, rumors of wights and pale devils circulated around campfires. Fear was thick enough to taste. Finally, the unified host marched to the wall. Columns of men on foot, knights on horseback, supply wagons, smiths, healers, and more. They passed through the new-fallen snow, breath steaming, eyes scanning the horizon for threat. And then, rising across the tundra, they saw it, the wall, a colossal barrier of ice stretching as far as the eye could see, pale in the winter light. Men gaped at it, some for the first time. King Rhaegar gazed upward at its frozen ramparts, feeling a swirl of awe and dread. Here was the line between civilization and a wilderness that might harbor nightmares. Castle Black stood at the wall's base, bristling with watchtowers and newly fortified palisades. The black-clad brothers hurried about, though many paused to stare at the grand sight of a Targaryen king leading a host to their defense. Lord Commander Corgyle, a leathery Dornishman with a streak of gray in his hair, greeted them. His face was lined with fatigue. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "You come in our darkest hour." Rhaegar dismounted, stepping forward. Snow clung to his cloak, his breath forming clouds. "We stand together, Lord Commander," he said. "Tell us all you know." In a hastily convened war council within the wooden hall, Corgyle and his senior officers described the sightings. Scouts had indeed found others, tall, gaunt, silent, seemingly impervious to normal steel. Their weapons were blades of ice that could shatter swords with cold. The whites, reanimated corpses of men and beasts, formed the bulk of their apparent army. "We haven't seen them mass in large numbers yet," Corgyle admitted grimly, "but we fear that day is near. Already, small parties slip past our patrols, attacking villages in the far north. We lose more men daily." Ned Stark stood by a table strewn with hand-drawn maps, jaw clenched. "Then we must push beyond the wall, find them before they gather strength. Let them not choose the field of battle." His northern lords nodded in agreement, though the danger was obvious. Rhaegar ran a hand over the battered table. "Have you tried dragoglass weapons?" he asked. "The stories say that obsidian can kill White Walkers." Corgyle nodded. "Aye, we found some old caches. A few watchers managed to kill whites with dragoglass daggers. Fire also seemed effective. But we have limited supplies. We need more, and we need cunning tactics. No man can stand alone against a White Walker. We must outnumber them or outmaneuver them." Tyrell men, Arryn knights, and northern lords crowded in, each offering suggestions. Rhaegar listened carefully. Ultimately, it was decided that the main host would fortify Castle Black and the nearby castles along the wall while sending out strong scouting parties armed with dragoglass and heavy steel. The watchword was caution. They would not let large groups wander too far beyond the wall alone for fear of ambush. Meanwhile, more ravens would be sent to gather any available dragoglass from Dragonstone or the volcanic islands near the broken Arm of Dorne. Night fell and the cold deepened. Soldiers huddled around fires, telling hush tales of the day. The silhouettes of the massive scorpions on the wall's ramparts stood stark against a cloudy sky. Rhaegar walked among the men, offering words of encouragement, though he felt the same gnawing dread. If the others attacked in force, if these old legends had even half the power rumored, what hope did normal men have? Still, the realm was here, united. That was no small thing. Rhaegar had dreamed of this unity, though never under such dire circumstances. In a private moment, he stood at the base of the wall, palm pressed to the cold ice, remembering a prophecy about the dragon having 3 heads. He thought of Aegon, Rhaenys, and Jon, safe in King's Landing, and prayed the realm would not burn or freeze before they came of age. 3 days later, a scouting party returned in a panic. They had sighted a gathering of whites near the fist of the first men, scores, possibly hundreds, led by white-faced shapes that vanished into a swirling snowstorm. One man's face was ashen as he described the half-seen glimpses. We saw them from a ridge. The night was dark, but their eyes glowed with a blue hue, flickering like cold flames. We dared not get closer. At once, the War Council convened again. Rhaegar and Ned locked gazes. They could not afford to let the enemy gather unchallenged so near the wall. It was decided that a sizable force would march to the fist, attempt to drive back or destroy the whites before they could mass. Barristan Selmy was not here. He had marched with a separate column, delayed by weather, but there were other seasoned knights. Lords of the North, the Vale, and the Reach prepared for battle. Rhaegar declared that he himself would lead them. Ned insisted on joining, unwilling to let a southern king protect the north alone. At dawn, they set out. The snow-laden forest was eerily silent, branches drooping under ice, every sound muffled. Thousands of men marched, bearing torches and some newly forged dragaglass arrowheads. War horns occasionally broke the hush. Their breath hung in the air. Rhaegar wore armor black as night, the three-headed dragon in silver on his breast, a sword of Valyrian steel at his side. Ned Stark donned thick furs over his plate, a dire wolf sigil on his shield. Men from all corners of the realm surrounded them, forging a circle of steel around the king and the Lord of Winterfell. They came upon the fist of the first men, an ancient ring fort on a lonely rise, battered by wind and snow. The tracks were fresh scrapes in the drifts, signs of passage. Scouts spread out. The hush weighed heavier than any anvil. Then a cry rang out, "Whites? Form up!" Shapes emerged from the swirling snowfall, a half-decayed men in ragged furs, eyes dull, movements jerky. They came in small clusters at first, but more lumbered forth behind them. At their rear, pale figures with glowing blue eyes loomed, tall as a man but inhumanly lithe. The White Walkers. One raised an arm, gripping an icy blade. A haunting rattle echoed across the wind. A hush of terror rippled through the living host. But King Rhaegar shouted, "Archers, loose!" Arrows streaked the air, some tipped with dragaglass. Where they struck whites, flames or black shards of obsidian stuck and sizzled. Several whites collapsed, unmoving. But those missed by dragonglass pressed on, howling in eerie silence. The White Walkers themselves strode forward, deflecting arrows with unnatural speed or letting them shatter on their ice blades. The battle erupted in a savage flurry. Northern and southern men formed ranks, driving spears into the undead. Some whites fell easily, only to rise again moments later unless burned or struck with obsidian. Shouts of horror spread. A knight of the Vale found himself face-to-face with a White Walker, his steel sword shattered on contact with the Walker's blade, and in a heartbeat, the Walker ran him through with a whisper of frost. Screams rang out. Rhaegar spurred forward, sword drawn. A cluster of whites lunged, but northern axemen hacked them down, giving Rhaegar room to press onward. He saw Ned Stark crossing blades with a White Walker. Ned's sword, fresh from the forges of Winterfell, had an obsidian edge hammered into the fuller. Sparks of ice and stone flew as they clashed. The Walker hissed, an alien sound. Rhaegar rushed in from the side, swinging his Valyrian steel with all his might. He struck the Walker in the flank. There was a shriek like cold wind, and cracks appeared in the creature's torso. It staggered, then shattered into a cascade of frosty shards. Ned, panting, gave Rhaegar a brief, grateful nod. All around them, men fought desperately, discovering that fire, dragaglass, or Valyrian steel were the only sure ways to kill the whites or their masters. Shouts of "burn them!" intermingled with war horns. Torches flickered, some lost in the snow, others pressed into the rotting forms of whites, sending them collapsing in flames. The White Walkers fought with lethal elegance, cutting down men who stood in their way. But the living had numbers and some measure of knowledge. Little by little, the undead lines buckled. Another White Walker was felled by a concerted effort. 3 men pinned it while a fourth drove a dragaglass dagger into its heart. At last, the remaining walkers retreated, gliding back into the swirling snow with unnatural speed, leaving the whites behind. Those whites that could not flee were destroyed or collapsed in smoldering heaps. The entire fight lasted perhaps an hour, but it felt like an eternity. In the end, the living stood battered, reeling with shock. Bodies of men littered the snow, some reanimated, some mercifully beyond the walkers' power. The cost was high, but the living had proven that the others could be fought, perhaps even beaten. King Rhaegar stood in the red-stained snow, breathing raggedly. He wiped frost from his sword, black hair swirling around his face in the wind. Ned Stark emerged beside him, bruised and shivering but alive, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. The ring fort was dotted with the burned remains of whites, the ground scarred by footprints that led away into the storm. Men either collapsed in relief or huddled to tend the wounded. It was not a victory in the conventional sense. They had not annihilated the others, but they had forced them to withdraw, dispelling the myth of invincibility. A hush fell as Rhaegar raised his sword high, letting the gray light reflect on its dark steel. A ragged cheer broke from some throats, a combination of triumph, terror, and relief. Ned sank to one knee in the snow, pressing a hand to a fallen comrade's chest. Silence weighed on them all, broken only by the moans of the injured. Eventually, the survivors gathered. Fires were lit to burn any whites that still twitched. The living tended to their fallen. Rhaegar addressed the men in a voice that trembled with exhaustion but carried determination. "We have seen the face of our enemy. They can be hurt. They can be driven back. We must press on, fortify the wall, gather more dragonglass, more flame. Our unity has given us this chance. We cannot falter now." A fresh gust of wind swept across the fist of the first men, blowing snow over the corpses. Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly, thinking of the realm he had left behind, the family he yearned to protect. He thought of Aegon, Rhaenys, and Jon. He thought of Elia and Lyanna. He pictured the entire tapestry of Westeros, from Dorne's deserts to the frosty shores of the north. If they failed here, all of it would be lost. If they stood firm, they might forge a new age, one where the night was held back not by a single hero, but by the combined might of a realm that had at last learned the value of standing as one. In that stark, frozen moment, King Rhaegar Targaryen steeled his heart. He knew this war would be long and merciless. Yet he believed that the living could stand against the dead. He would not allow the dream of a reborn Westeros, one forged through mercy, justice, and hard-won unity, to perish in the dark. Clutching his sword, feeling the bitter cold seep through his bones, he silently vowed that the dragons and wolves, the roses and lions, the trident and spear, would all fight side by side for the dawn. If prophecy had led him astray before, it mattered less now. The bonds of love and loyalty, the will to survive, shone brighter than any mystic dream. And as the wind shrieked across the haunted heights of the Fist, as the last ghostly traces of the others vanished into the white horizon, Rhaegar Targaryen lifted his gaze to the storm-laden sky. For an instant, he imagined he saw a faint red comet overhead, bleeding color across the clouds. Whether it was real or an illusion, he found hope in it, a sign that the fire within men's hearts might yet burn away the endless night. He turned to Ned and the other battered lords, nodded once, and together they marched back into the swirling snow, carrying the light of the living with them.